The observer override paradox. You might think that simply watching a choice unfold is a neutral act, but that is an illusion. The very act of observation changes the outcome. This is the heart of the observer override paradox, a concept that cuts deeply into how we understand free will, identity, and reality itself. Imagine trying to watch a river flow without disturbing the water. Impossible, right? Because your presence, your gaze, your very awareness pushes against the stream and shifts it ever so slightly. The choice you think you see is no longer pure. It has been altered simply because you looked. But it goes even deeper than that. Consider the lens through which you observe these choices. This lens, your identity, your history, your beliefs, was not something you created from scratch, free and detached. Instead, it was shaped, molded, influenced by forces beyond your control. Family, culture, trauma, education, society, all these invisible hands fashion the way you see the world, the way you interpret every possibility. So, before you even see a choice, the filter through which you perceive it has already been chosen for you. Who chose it? You might think it was you, but that is the paradox. In quantum physics, this is echoed by the observer effect, the fact that measuring a quantum system changes it. The parallels in human psychology and philosophy are uncanny. Every decision you make is observed not just by your conscious mind, but also by the unconscious biases, inherited beliefs, and pre-installed narratives. You are both the observer and the observed, but your observations are not pure reflections of reality. They are refracted through a prism you did not select. Let's take an example. Imagine you were at a crossroads, literally or metaphorically. You want to choose between two paths. You stand there and try to observe your thoughts carefully, but you notice certain feelings pulling you towards one path. Those feelings are not random. They are shaped by your past experiences, fears, desires, and the stories you've been told about who you are and what you deserve. These influences act as a lens, guiding your observation and therefore your choice. So, is the choice truly yours? Or is it predetermined by the observer, the lens itself, you never freely built? Now, picture a child raised in a strict household where failure is punished harshly. When faced with a difficult choice, the child's observation is colored by anxiety and the expectation of punishment. The lens is one of fear. The child's choices will be constrained, shaped by this inherited observer lens. Contrast this with someone raised in an environment of encouragement and freedom, whose lens filters choices through hope and possibility. The two observe the same choice but experience entirely different realities. The observer lens not only overrides but rewrites the narrative of choice. The paradox deepens when you realize that even your awareness of this lens is itself filtered. You cannot step outside your identity to see it objectively, because your identity is the frame through which you understand everything. This creates a self-referential loop. You are trapped in a hall of mirrors, where each reflection is distorted by the frame of the previous one. Trying to find the original lens, or the pure observer, is like chasing a shadow. Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. René Descartes famously said, "I think therefore I am," positing the self as a thinking observer. But what if the I that thinks is itself a product of unseen forces, a lens handed down by biology and culture? The paradox suggests that what we consider free observation is always a performance directed by an author we never met. Modern neuroscience adds another layer. Studies show that many decisions are made subconsciously before reaching conscious awareness. Your brain has already observed, processed, and leaned towards a choice before you feel like you freely chose it. The observer inside your head is often a storyteller, fabricating narratives after the fact to make sense of what has already been decided. This implies that the observer override is not just external, but internal, and built into the architecture of your mind. This raises a haunting question. If every choice is observed through a lens you did not build, and if observation itself changes the choice, then what meaning does free will have? Are you the author of your story, or just a character following a script written by unseen observers? Some might find this disheartening, but there is a subtle liberation in embracing the paradox. Understanding that your observations and choices are influenced by layers of unseen factors can help you cultivate awareness. You may not have chosen your lens, but you can learn to recognize it, question it, and perhaps even reshape it over time. This is the slow process of self-discovery, becoming a conscious observer of your own observer. Consider meditation or deep reflection as tools that attempt to disentangle the layers. By observing your thoughts without immediate judgment, you glimpse the lens itself. It's not easy, and the lens never fully disappears, but awareness softens its grip. It's like stepping back from the edge of the river and watching the currents without trying to control them. You realize that while you cannot stop the water from flowing or the lens from filtering, you can change how you relate to them. In relationships, this paradox plays out every day. When you watch someone's behavior and judge it, your observations are filtered through your identity, your fears, hopes, and past wounds. You might blame the other person, but often you are simply projecting your observer lens onto them. Recognizing this can transform conflicts, helping you see not just the other's actions, but also your own perceptions as a part of the story. History itself is shaped by observer lenses. Different cultures, eras, and groups see the same events through drastically different filters, creating competing narratives. The observer. Override paradox is a reminder that truth is rarely singular or fixed. It's shaped by who observes and how. In the end, the paradox teaches a profound humility about the nature of choice and perception. We are not detached witnesses, but participants whose presence shapes the very reality we try to understand. We carry lenses not freely chosen, but inherited and imposed, yet within that constraint lies the power of awareness. So, next time you find yourself observing a choice, pause to ask, who chose the lens I am seeing through? What unseen observer guides this view? And can I learn to gently lift the veil, if only for a moment, to glimpse the choice beyond the observer? The observer. Override paradox is not just a problem of philosophy or physics. It's the intimate experience of consciousness wrestling with itself, a dance between what is seen and what sees, between freedom and influence, between the choice and the lens that bends it. And in that dance, you may find not despair, but a new kind of freedom, the freedom to question, to reflect, and to become ever more aware of the lenses you wear, and the power that comes from seeing them clearly. The predicted will collapse. If a machine could predict your choice with perfect accuracy, the question that arises is unsettling yet unavoidable. Did you ever truly choose at all? Or were you merely enacting a script already written by the invisible hand of determinism, performing an illusion of freedom designed to make you feel sovereign, while in reality, you were just the subject of a forecast? This paradox, where the predictability of human decisions challenges the very essence of free will, is a profound puzzle that cuts to the heart of philosophy, science, and psychology. Imagine a machine, not some vague hypothetical, but a powerful system capable of knowing every detail of your past, every impulse stirring within your mind, every memory, bias, and emotion. It runs these inputs through an algorithm more complex than anything human minds could conceive, and outputs a precise prediction of your next choice, whether it's what you will have for breakfast, which route you will take to work, or whether you will accept a friend's invitation. The prediction is unfailingly accurate. This machine's certainty implies that your decisions are as fixed and inevitable as the paths of planets in orbit. If this is true, then the familiar experience of deliberation, the back-and-forth tug of conflicting desires and thoughts, is a kind of theater, a play enacted inside your mind, giving you the feeling of agency while you move inevitably toward the predicted outcome. The sensation of choosing freely may be nothing more than a side effect, a mental narrative spun to maintain coherence and sanity. The mind craves the idea of freedom. It needs it to feel whole and responsible. But what if this freedom is only apparent, not actual? The implications are dizzying. Responsibility, morality, identity, all become fluid concepts when choice is preordained. If every action is foreseen, is accountability meaningful? Can punishment or praise be justified when the decision was never truly yours to make? Or are we locked in a grand cosmic script where the illusion of control is the only control we have? To understand this better, consider an analogy from a simple game, chess. A master player might predict moves several turns ahead with stunning accuracy. The player is bound by the rules of the game and the current board configuration, which constrain possible moves. In a similar way, your mind operates under biological, environmental, and psychological constraints. These factors shape your decisions and limit the range of possible choices. If a machine has access to all these constraints, it can anticipate your moves. But here lies a subtlety. The very awareness of the prediction might influence your choice, creating a paradox. If you know the machine predicts you will take path A, you might choose path B just to prove it wrong. Yet, if you do that, the machine's prediction must have accounted for that awareness, predicting you'd defy it, and so on ad infinitum. This recursive loop, sometimes called the prediction paradox, suggests that perfect prediction is not just difficult. It might be logically impossible in some cases, because the act of predicting changes the predicted outcome. Still, the scenario assumes an observer outside the system, watching and calculating without being noticed. But what if you are part of the system? The machine's prediction is embedded within the fabric of your existence. You are both the player and the predicted. In such a closed system, the prediction and the choice are entwined. The predicted will, then, collapses into the actual, indistinguishable from one another. Now, let's explore a real-life example that echoes this dilemma: behavioral economics and advertising. Companies collect massive amounts of data on your behavior, what you click, buy, like, and share. Using this data, algorithms predict your preferences and nudge you towards certain choices. Over time, your online environment shapes and limits your options, subtly steering your decisions before you even realize it. Are you choosing freely or acting out what the algorithms anticipated? The more precise these predictions become, the more your agency seems to diminish. Yet, people resist this idea. There is a deep, almost sacred belief in free will, the notion that at some level, each of us crafts our own destiny. Without this belief, how do we find meaning? How do we build trust in ourselves and others? The collapse of the predicted will threaten to unravel these pillars of human experience. One possible response is compatibilism, a philosophical stance that argues free will and determinism are not mutually exclusive. It suggests that even if our choices are predictable, they can still be free if they align with our internal desires and motivations. Freedom, in this sense, is not about randomness or unpredictability, but about authenticity and self-governance within the constraints of causality. But even compatibilism faces challenges. If you knew your choices were entirely predictable, would you feel genuinely free? Or would the knowledge itself trap you in fatalism, a sense that all roads are foreclosed except the one mapped out by past causes? On a more scientific front, developments in neuroscience shed light on this debate. Experiments have shown that brain activity predicting decisions occurs milliseconds before conscious awareness. Your brain decides before you feel you have decided. This suggests consciousness may only become aware of choices after the fact, reinforcing the idea that free will is a constructed narrative. Still, consciousness might have a role in vetoing or modifying impulses, a free won't, as some scientists call it. Perhaps freedom lies not in the absolute origination of choice, but in the capacity to reflect, reconsider, and sometimes resist initial urges. This subtle form of freedom coexists with predictability, but complicates the notion of a perfectly predicted will. Ultimately, the question of whether a predicted will collapses free choice is not just a philosophical puzzle, but a profound exploration of what it means to be human. Are we actors on a predetermined stage, or co-authors of our stories? Is the self a fixed entity, or a fluid process, shaped by countless causes and effects? The tension between prediction and freedom invites us to rethink identity, responsibility, and the nature of consciousness itself. In a world advancing rapidly toward greater data collection, AI, and predictive technologies, these questions grow more urgent. When machines can forecast human behavior with uncanny accuracy, how do we preserve dignity, autonomy, and moral agency? Perhaps the answer lies not in denying prediction, but in embracing the complexity of human experience, the gray area where prediction meets spontaneity, where determinism meets choice, and where the predicted will dances with the will to predict. The predicted will may not be freedom's collapse, but its catalyst, challenging us to redefine what freedom truly means in an age where every move can be foreseen, yet every moment still holds the possibility of surprise. The reflective actor dilemma. Imagine for a moment that every choice you make is not truly original, but a reaction to the world reacting to you. The reflective actor dilemma suggests that your decisions don't arise from a single source inside you, but from an endless loop of cause and effect, where your actions reflect the world, and the world reflects your actions back, creating a hall of mirrors. In this labyrinth, trying to find the origin of a decision becomes impossible, because every reflection changes the image, and every image is shaped by another reflection. This dilemma probes deeply into the nature of free will and identity. When you make a choice, how much of it is really yours? Are you the author of your will, or just a player caught in a hall of echoes, forever responding to the reactions you set in motion? The world around you is not static. It perceives you, interprets you, and responds. Your own behavior shifts in response to this feedback. So, when you say, "I chose this," what you are really saying is, "I reacted to a reaction that was itself a reaction to me." Consider social interactions. When you smile at someone, they smile back, and your smile shifts in tone or intensity because of their response. The decision to smile started inside you, but was instantly entangled in a web of mutual reactions. Each movement, each gesture, each word becomes part of this complex dance. You are not an isolated source, but a reflective actor, always responding to the reflection cast back by others. The problem is that the initial impulse is lost in this dance, impossible to identify, because every response alters the next move. Take, for example, a political leader trying to enact policy. They announce a law, but the public reaction shapes how the leader behaves next. The leader then adjusts policy in response to public sentiment, which is itself a reflection of the leader's original actions. The feedback loop never ends. Where does the leader's true choice lie? In their initial intent or in the reactive adjustments made after public reaction? In this scenario, the origin blurs into an infinite mirror of reflections. The reflective actor dilemma also speaks to self-awareness. When you observe yourself deciding, you are witnessing a process already tangled in this feedback loop. Your thoughts respond to the environment, which responds to you, which responds to your thoughts. Your inner world mirrors the outer world, and the two reflect each other endlessly. It becomes unclear whether your choices come from an authentic self, or are merely responses to a world constantly reacting to you. Psychology offers insight here. The idea that people's behavior is shaped by how they think others perceive them is well documented in the concept of the looking-glass self. We form our identities based on others' reactions to us, and then act accordingly. But this means that the self you think you control is already shaped by external reflections. Your decisions are not isolated, but refracted through social mirrors. In neuroscience, this relates to the brain's predictive nature. Our brains constantly predict how others will react and adjust our own behavior to fit these predictions. We are less autonomous authors of action and more adaptive players in a reactive system. The line between self and other blurs, replaced by an ongoing exchange of mirrored responses. Philosophically, this dilemma challenges the classical idea of a singular, stable self making autonomous choices. Instead, it suggests that selfhood is fractured, distributed across interactions, and emergent from this web of reflection. Your decisions are not fixed points, but shifting images in the hall of mirrors. The origin of choice becomes elusive, like trying to find the center of a kaleidoscope. One vivid example lies in social media dynamics. Every post you make is a choice influenced by anticipated reactions, likes, comments, shares. But these reactions feed back into your next posts, shaping your future choices in real time. Your online persona is thus a reflective actor, constantly adjusting to the world's reflection of you, making authentic origin of decision impossible to pin down. This also impacts creativity. When artists create, they do so in conversation with their audience's expectations and reactions, as well as their own past work's reception. Their creative choices are reflections of these multiple feedbacks, creating a hall of mirrors where originality is entwined with reaction. The creative act is never solitary, but dialogic, a continual process of reflecting and being reflected. In intimate relationships, the dilemma manifests deeply. Partners respond to each other's moods, words, and gestures. Each reaction shapes the next, and the origin of any emotional decision becomes entangled. Who decides to forgive or withdraw first? The answer slips away, lost in the intertwined reflections of two reactive actors. To confront the reflective actor dilemma is to recognize that identity and free will are less about isolated origins and more about dynamic patterns and relational feedback loops. It suggests that understanding oneself requires looking beyond the illusion of a single point of origin to the complexity of interactions, reflections, and mutual influence. So, are you truly choosing, or are you endlessly reacting to a world that reacts back to you? The answer lies not in breaking the loop, but in embracing its complexity. Your decisions are a dance of reflections, a hall of mirrors where the self emerges not as a fixed source, but as an ever-shifting image created through interaction. In this, there is both mystery and freedom. Freedom to navigate the reflections with awareness, to participate in the dance, even if the original impulse remains forever elusive. This is the paradox and beauty of the reflective actor dilemma. It dissolves the certainty of a singular origin, leaving us with the profound realization that our lives unfold in a network of mirrored responses, each decision a ripple in the reflective pool of existence. Understanding this, we can stop seeking unreachable origins and instead become conscious actors in the ongoing play of reflections. Ultimately, the dilemma invites a deeper self-awareness, not the self as a solitary decision-maker, but as a participant in a vast interconnected web of reflection and response. It challenges us to rethink agency, identity, and the nature of choice itself, revealing that to act is always to reflect, and to reflect is always to act. The Hall of Mirrors may never reveal a center, but it offers endless possibilities to see ourselves anew in the reflections we create. The role inhabitation loop. You ever stop to think about who you really are beneath all the roles you play? Not just the obvious ones, like being a parent, a friend, an employee, but the deeper, invisible roles you inhabit because that's what you were told you are. This is the essence of what I call the role inhabitation loop. It's a cycle so subtle, so embedded in our psyche that we hardly notice it. Yet, it shapes our every move, thought, and feeling until the performance becomes the identity. And identity becomes a command we obey without question. Let's break this down. Imagine a child growing up in a family where they are always called the shy one. Over time, the child starts to perform shyness because that's the role expected of them. The words echo in their mind. You're shy. You don't speak up. Slowly but surely, the child internalizes this performance, and shyness isn't just a behavior anymore. It becomes their identity. When new situations arise, the automatic response is to retreat, to stay quiet, because that's who they are supposed to be. The role isn't just played, it's inhabited. The child becomes the shyness they were told they were. This is the loop. You are told who you are. You perform that. Then, by performing it, you reinforce the belief in yourself as that role. Eventually, that belief commands your actions and decisions. There's no longer a conscious choice because the role dictates your behavior like a script. This isn't limited to childhood or family. It extends into every social context: schools, workplaces, communities, even online spaces. The moment you are assigned a label or role, you're set on a path where your freedom to redefine yourself shrinks. You become trapped inside the narrative that others have written for you. Take the example of the bad student. A teenager labeled as disruptive or lazy starts to live up to that label. Teachers expect failure or trouble. Peers expect rebellion. And the teenager, feeling these expectations like an invisible leash, behaves accordingly. That role no longer feels like a choice. It becomes a chain. The teenager might want to break free, but the internalized role pulls them back like gravity. The role inhabitation loop is not just about negative labels either. It also includes positive roles, but those too can become prisons. The golden child, for example, may feel pressured to always be perfect, always succeed, because that's their assigned role. Performance becomes a command they can't escape. The weight of expectation erases the space to simply be human, flawed, and free. Now, why does this happen? How does mere performance morph into identity and then into a command? It has to do with the human brain's craving for coherence and belonging. We need to feel like we fit into the social puzzle, so we accept the roles given to us, even if they don't align with our authentic selves. Our minds conserve energy by following scripts we've internalized instead of constantly questioning or reinventing ourselves. The more we perform a role, the stronger the neural pathways supporting that behavior become. It's a feedback loop, hardwired by repetition and social reinforcement. This loop also thrives on external validation. When others treat you as your role, praise you for it, or criticize you for failing to live up to it, the role is reinforced. You're rewarded for staying in character, punished for stepping outside it. Over time, this external feedback feels internalized. Your own self-talk mirrors the commands of the role. Consider the professional world. Someone who is always labeled the leader at work starts to inhabit that role fully. They feel the pressure to always take charge, to always be confident and decisive. This can be empowering, but also limiting. What if they want to show vulnerability or admit uncertainty? The role's command forbids it. They perform leadership so consistently that it becomes their identity, and it shapes their inner dialogue and choices. The loop becomes a cage. On a societal scale, the role inhabitation loop explains how entire groups can be trapped in narratives imposed on them by history, culture, or politics. Stereotypes about race, gender, class, or nationality are roles handed down through generations. When a group is told, explicitly or implicitly, who they are supposed to be, their collective identity can become locked in place. The performance of these roles sustains the stereotypes, and the stereotypes command the behavior of individuals inside the group. Breaking the role inhabitation loop is not easy, because it's a feedback system built on repetition, social expectation, and internalized belief. It requires conscious effort and often external support to disrupt. The first step is awareness, recognizing the roles you inhabit and how they govern your actions. Questioning the story you tell yourself about who you are is revolutionary. It's uncomfortable because the loop offers a kind of safety and predictability, but it's a false safety that costs authenticity and freedom. Therapy, reflective practices, and safe spaces can help unravel these loops. When you experiment with acting outside your role, trying behaviors or thoughts that don't fit the script, you weaken the loop's power. Over time, new narratives can be built, more aligned with your authentic self, not just the roles handed down by others. Think about the power in that. To reclaim identity from performance is to reclaim freedom. It's to say, I am more than the labels you gave me. I am not your script. It's the breaking of chains forged in invisible social commands. In art, literature, and film, this theme recurs because it touches a universal human struggle. Characters who break out of imposed roles, who defy expectations, who rewrite their identity, these stories resonate deeply because they mirror a primal fight for selfhood against invisible forces. But the loop can also be self-reinforcing in a dangerous way. Sometimes, people cling to roles even when harmful, because abandoning them means confronting an unknown void. It can be terrifying to lose the certainty of who you are, even if that certainty is a lie. The role inhabitation loop becomes a form of psychological captivity, where freedom is sacrificed for the illusion of identity. This loop also influences how societies maintain order and control. Systems of power often assign roles deliberately to keep people in place. Workers, leaders, rebels, followers. The more people inhabit and perform these roles, the more stable the system appears. But beneath the surface, the loop limits potential, stifles creativity, and suppresses authentic connection. So what can you do when you catch yourself in the role inhabitation loop? First, pause and observe. Notice when your reactions or thoughts are scripted rather than spontaneous. Ask yourself, is this really who I want to be? Or is it what I was told to be? Then, try small acts of rebellion against the script. Speak your truth, challenge assumptions, explore new facets of your personality. It's a gradual process. Freedom from the loop is not a single event, but an unfolding journey of self-discovery and courage. The moment you reclaim choice, even in small ways, you start to dismantle the loop's power. In the end, the role inhabitation loop teaches us a profound lesson. Identity is not fixed or given. It is fluid and created. When we realize that performance doesn't have to become command, that the stories others tell us can be questioned, we open the door to true freedom, the freedom to invent, to change, to be fully and authentically ourselves. This is why understanding the role inhabitation loop matters. It's not just a psychological curiosity. It's a key to breaking cycles that limit our lives. It's a call to awareness and to the radical act of choosing who we want to be, beyond the roles we were assigned. And that choice, that breaking free, is the most powerful command we can ever follow. So, next time you feel trapped by expectations, remember, you are more than the roles you play. You are the author of your own story, the director of your own performance, and with that knowledge comes the power to rewrite the script and live a life that truly belongs to you. The choice simulation paradox. When we think about making choices, we imagine freedom, the freedom to decide, to act, to shape our own path. But what if that freedom is an illusion? What if every choice we make is not born from spontaneous action, but from a silent, relentless simulation happening inside our minds? A simulation of possibilities, risks, outcomes, and fears. This is the heart of the choice simulation paradox. Before a decision, our minds run countless scenarios. We imagine every possible outcome. We play out conversations, consequences, successes, and failures, all in the safety of thought. This mental rehearsal is so vivid and detailed that the eventual choice feels less like a leap into the unknown and more like selecting the safest story, the least painful fiction we can tell ourselves. Consider a simple choice, whether to speak up in a meeting. In that moment, the mind conjures a series of possible futures. What if I speak and everyone agrees? What if I embarrass myself? What if I offend someone important? Each scenario is a thread we tug at, a plot we script. And rather than choosing freely, we gravitate toward the narrative that feels least threatening, most comfortable. We simulate to avoid pain, rejection, or chaos. So, is this freedom or just selecting from pre-written scripts? This simulation is an ancient survival tool, deeply wired in us. Our ancestors' survival depended on predicting dangers, calculating risks before acting. But in the modern world, it becomes a cage. The endless mental simulations create paralysis, endless loops of doubt and fear. Instead of free will, we see free will as a filtered outcome, a choice filtered through a sieve of imagined consequences. Philosophers and psychologists call this simulation bias. The mind favors familiar outcomes. It's easier to pick a story that matches past experiences or societal expectations than to risk an uncharted path. The paradox here is that even when we feel revolutionary, spontaneous, or rebellious, the decision was sculpted in the quiet, controlled theater of the mind, rehearsed to death before execution. Think of a musician before a performance. Every note, every movement is imagined hundreds of times, yet the actual performance feels like freedom, like raw creativity. But that freedom was pre-constructed, born from simulation. The illusion of spontaneity masks the layers of preparation and mental rehearsal. The choice simulation paradox also reveals itself in larger life decisions. Choosing a career, a partner, a city to live in. We weigh every option in an invisible mental simulation chamber. The final choice is often the one that feels safest, most predictable. Riskier options, the ones that might lead to radical growth or unexpected pain, are rejected early in the simulation process. Freedom becomes safety. Action becomes avoidance. This mental simulation is both a blessing and a curse. It protects us from rash mistakes, but traps us in comfort zones. It creates the illusion of control, but often blinds us to deeper desires and unknown possibilities. The stories we choose to believe shape our reality, but the range of stories considered is never infinite. It's limited by fear, past trauma, social conditioning, and self-doubt. Examples in everyday life show how pervasive this is. Someone wanting to start a business simulates all possible failures and financial losses, and ultimately chooses a stable job instead. Someone craving adventure imagines rejection and loneliness and stays in familiar relationships. The freedom to choose is real only in the sense that the mind selects among simulated options, but the spontaneity or radical choice is filtered through a lens of survival. Even neuroscience supports this. Studies show that brain activity predicting a decision occurs seconds before we consciously make that choice. Our brains simulate future outcomes non-stop, long before we feel the moment of choice. This means the feeling of freedom, the moment we say, "I choose," is actually an after-the-fact narration constructed by the brain to explain what it has already decided. The paradox forces us to ask, is true freedom a myth? Or can freedom exist outside mental simulation? Perhaps true freedom arises not from choosing the safest story, but from embracing uncertainty, stepping beyond simulation into the unknown with courage. But to do that, one must acknowledge the paradox, that the mind is always simulating, always scripting, and intentionally choose to act beyond the scripts it offers. This demands deep awareness and radical honesty, recognizing that what feels like a free choice is often the safest story chosen by fear. Understanding that the mind's simulations are neither good nor bad, they are survival tools. But surviving and truly living are not the same. The latter requires breaking the loop, taking leaps into uncertainty where simulation fails. In this light, the choice simulation paradox is not a condemnation of human will, but an invitation to deeper self-mastery, to see the simulation for what it is, and then to step beyond it, to feel the discomfort of the unknown and still act, to embrace the possibility that freedom is not a safe choice among options, but the act of creating new options in defiance of fear's script. Imagine the power of that, to realize your mind simulates endlessly, but you can choose when to stop simulating and start living. To know that the stories inside your head are not your destiny, but just possibilities, and your real power lies in choosing which fiction you will act out, or even better, which new story you will write with your actions. The paradox leaves us at a crossroads. We can continue to live inside simulation, choosing safety over freedom, repetition over novelty, fear over growth. Or we can dare to act beyond simulation, embracing chaos and the unknown. That is the essence of true choice, the freedom not of imagined options, but of brave action itself. And in that brave action lies the paradox's resolution. Freedom is not found in the simulations, but in the courageous break from them. It is in the moment when the mind's rehearsed scripts fall away and raw, unpredictable life begins. The broadcast consciousness effect. Your thoughts feel like private whispers inside your mind, unique and personal. Yet, beneath that intimate surface lies a startling truth. Those thoughts are not truly yours alone. They are echoes, resonances shaped by the culture you live in, the language you speak, and the conditioning you have absorbed since birth. This is the essence of the broadcast consciousness effect, a profound and unsettling reality that challenges the very notion of individual thinking. Who, then, is actually thinking inside your skull? Imagine your mind as a radio receiver. It tunes into frequencies transmitted by the world around you: family, society, media, history. These broadcasts flood your consciousness, delivering patterns of belief, values, fears, and desires that you often mistake for original ideas. You feel like you are the author, but many of your mental scripts are written elsewhere, long before you formed your own self-image. Take language, for example. Every word you use carries the weight of centuries of cultural meaning. When you form a thought, it is already shaped by the grammar and vocabulary of your native tongue. You cannot think beyond the limits of language because it provides the framework for your very concepts. Consider how different languages divide the world into distinct categories, influencing perception itself. For instance, some languages assign gender to objects, subtly coloring emotional responses to everyday things. Others have no future tense, which studies suggest affects how speakers perceive time and planning. Your internal monologue is therefore a reflection of these cultural transmissions, not a purely original creation. Culture is another powerful broadcaster. From early childhood, you absorb norms, stories, taboos, and aspirations through family, education, media, and social interactions. These collective narratives become the soil in which your thoughts grow. When you judge, aspire, fear, or hope, you are often echoing voices that preceded you. The values of honor, success, morality, these are signals broadcast by your culture, shaping your mental landscape. Conditioning layers this further. Repeated experiences, rewards, punishments, and social cues train your brain to think and respond in patterned ways. These learned behaviors become automatic thoughts, habits of mind that feel spontaneous, but are in fact conditioned responses. For example, someone raised in a society that prizes competition will internalize thoughts about winning and losing as central to identity. Someone from a collectivist culture will often think in relational terms, prioritizing group harmony over individual achievement. Your mind is a patchwork quilt of conditioned thoughts woven by external forces. But what does this mean for the idea of self? If your thoughts are echoes broadcast from culture, language, and conditioning, then the I who thinks might be less of an independent thinker and more of a receiver, a filter, or even a conduit. The sense of a unified, autonomous self becomes questionable. You are, in part, a channel through which collective consciousness expresses itself. The boundaries between self and society blur. Consider a powerful example: propaganda and ideology. When a culture broadcasts a particular worldview relentlessly, whether political, religious, or social, it hijacks individual thought. People come to believe these narratives as their own, repeating slogans, adopting worldviews, and acting as agents of ideas they never critically chose. This is the broadcast consciousness effect in action, where the collective mind imprints itself deeply on the individual psyche. The media amplifies this effect exponentially. News cycles, social media, entertainment, all act as transmitters of dominant narratives, fears, and desires. The thoughts that arise in your mind often reflect the echoes of these broadcasts. Sometimes, entire populations think and feel in unison, swept by waves of collective emotion and belief. The self becomes a receiver in a vast network of shared consciousness. Yet, there is a paradox here. While your thoughts are shaped by these powerful external forces, you also possess the capacity for awareness, an observer within who can notice the broadcast signals and question them. This metacognition offers a path to reclaim some measure of autonomy. By recognizing that your thoughts are not always your own, you can start to discern which mental transmissions serve you and which merely repeat cultural noise. This requires deep introspection and critical thinking. Meditation, reflection, and exposure to diverse perspectives help weaken the automatic grip of conditioning. You begin to see the scaffolding of language and culture around your mind, and with that insight, you can gradually reshape your inner landscape. Awareness is the key to breaking the broadcast loop. Yet, the process is challenging. The broadcast consciousness effect operates largely beneath awareness, slipping through cracks and reinforcing itself silently. You may resist questioning your thoughts because they feel like your identity. To challenge them is to face uncertainty and discomfort. But this discomfort is necessary for growth, a confrontation with the reality that your mind is a dynamic field of influence, not a closed fortress. In relationships, this effect shows up as shared emotional climates. When groups resonate together, their thoughts and feelings synchronize, creating powerful shared experiences. Social contagion spreads moods and ideas rapidly, reinforcing the broadcast effect. The individual mind is never truly isolated. It is constantly interacting with the currents of collective thought. The implications stretch into philosophy and neuroscience. If the thought is so interwoven with external broadcasts, then the classic idea of an isolated, sovereign self is an oversimplification. The brain itself is a social organ, evolved to communicate, imitate, and synchronize with others. Consciousness emerges not in isolation, but in interaction. This challenges us to reconsider responsibility and freedom. If many of our thoughts are shaped by unseen cultural frequencies, how free are we really? Yet, acknowledging this does not eliminate agency. Rather, it redefines it. Freedom lies in becoming aware of the broadcast, choosing which signals to amplify, which to silence, and sometimes, in creating new transmissions altogether. The broadcast consciousness effect is a call to mindfulness about the origins of our thoughts. It asks us to listen carefully, to discern the echo from the voice, and to reclaim the space within where true choice and creativity can emerge. It invites humility about the extent to which we are shaped by invisible forces and courage to transcend them. So, next time you catch a thought arising, whether it feels comforting or disturbing, ask yourself, whose voice is this? Is it truly mine, or an echo from the vast cultural airwaves I am tuned into? Who is thinking inside my skull, and can I learn to listen beyond the broadcast? In this profound questioning lies the possibility of awakening, a move from passive receiver to active co-creator of your mental world. The broadcast consciousness effect reminds us that while our minds are shaped by culture, language, and conditioning, the ultimate power lies in our capacity to become conscious of those influences and to choose our own path within the vast, resonant field of human thought. The retrospective freedom illusion. You only label something a choice after the consequences arrive, rewriting the past into an illusion of agency you never had. This simple yet profound statement unravels one of the deepest paradoxes about human decision-making and free will. What we call choice might actually be a story told backward, a revisionist narrative our minds construct after the fact to preserve the illusion that we were ever truly free. Imagine standing at a crossroads, faced with a difficult decision. You deliberate, weigh options, imagine possible futures. You finally make a decision, and life unfolds accordingly. Later, when you reflect on that moment, you call it your choice. But the truth may be far more complex, far more unsettling. The label of choice is often slapped on after the outcome reveals itself, as if the mind is reaching back into the past to stitch a coherent story out of a chain of events that were never freely authored. The retrospective freedom illusion suggests that our sense of agency, the feeling that we consciously and independently selected a course of action, is largely a post hoc construction. It is our brain's way of making sense of the consequences that have already come to pass. Instead of freely choosing first and then experiencing results, we might be experiencing results first and then inventing the idea of choice to make those results psychologically acceptable and meaningful. This idea finds echoes in psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy. Studies show that our brains often initiate decisions milliseconds before we become consciously aware of making them. The readiness potential, a measurable brain signal, can predict a person's choice several hundred milliseconds before they consciously feel like they have chosen. If the brain decides before the mind is aware, then the conscious feeling of, "I chose this," is, at best, a delayed narration, not the driver of the decision. Consider the example of a simple action: reaching to grab a glass of water. Your brain initiates motor commands before you are consciously aware of deciding to act. The conscious mind merely observes the unfolding motion and claims ownership of the choice, crafting a story of intentional action. Now scale this up to complex, life-altering decisions. Is it possible that the feeling of agency in those moments is also a narrative pieced together after the consequences begin to take shape? Further, our memory is notoriously unreliable and malleable. The way we recall decisions changes over time, influenced by emotions, social pressures, and subsequent experiences. We often rewrite the past to align with who we believe ourselves to be or who we want others to see us as. The choice becomes a flexible concept, shaped not by what was actually decided, but by what the mind needs the story to be. This retroactive rewriting helps maintain a coherent self-image and justifies past actions, even when they might have been constrained by factors beyond our control. One stark illustration of this comes from studies on cognitive dissonance. When people face discomfort from conflicting beliefs or actions, they unconsciously adjust their memories and attitudes to reduce the tension. For example, after choosing between two similarly desirable options, individuals tend to inflate the positives of the chosen option and diminish the negatives of the rejected one. This post-decision rationalization creates the feeling that the original choice was clear, deliberate, and free, when, in reality, it was muddled and uncertain. Moreover, in legal and moral contexts, we assume that people make conscious choices deserving of praise or blame. But if choice is partly an after-the-fact label, the foundation for responsibility becomes fragile. How can we hold someone accountable for a choice that their conscious self only realized in hindsight, when much of the groundwork was laid unconsciously or shaped by external forces? This does not necessarily strip life of meaning, but it challenges our traditional understanding of freedom. If free will is less about moment-to-moment autonomous decisions and more about the stories we tell ourselves afterwards, then agency becomes a dynamic narrative process rather than a static fact. One real-world parallel is in the realm of marketing and behavioral nudges. Advertisers and platforms track user behavior meticulously and subtly shape environments to influence decisions. Users believe they freely choose products or content, but the architecture guiding their options is designed to funnel them towards certain outcomes. After they purchase or click, they reflect on their choice, convinced of its freedom, unaware that the environment scripted their path before conscious deliberation. Another example is in relationships. We often think of choosing partners or friends as pure acts of free will. Yet, cultural, familial, and psychological influences heavily pre-configure our preferences and possibilities. When a relationship ends or begins, the retrospective narrative about the choice we made may obscure the complex interplay of forces that nudged us along certain paths. So what does this mean for us? The retrospective freedom illusion invites humility in how we understand human behavior. It suggests that agency is not a simple, momentary act, but a layered process involving unconscious initiation, conscious awareness, and post hoc narrative construction. Recognizing this may help us become more compassionate with ourselves and others, aware that so-called choices are often entangled in factors beyond immediate control. At the same time, this insight empowers us to cultivate environments and habits that expand genuine freedom. While the brain may predecide many things, the stories we choose to tell ourselves, the meanings we assign to our actions, and the reflections we engage in shape our sense of self and influence future behavior. The narrative is not merely an illusion. It is part of what defines our humanity. In the end, the retrospective freedom illusion does not so much negate free will as it complicates it. It reveals that the mind is a storyteller, weaving the threads of past, present, and consequence into a coherent tale of agency. Whether that tale is true in the absolute sense may be unknowable, but it remains vital for how we experience ourselves and our place in the world. Acknowledging the illusion opens the door to deeper inquiry and greater self-awareness. It challenges us to ask, if choice is a story told backward, how can we craft that story with more honesty, depth, and compassion? How do we navigate a life where freedom is not a fixed point, but a shifting, retrospective dance between cause, effect, and meaning? These questions lie at the heart of understanding who we truly are. The compulsion, disguised as preference. Imagine a choice that feels entirely yours, like reaching for a certain habit, a specific comfort, or a familiar path. You believe you prefer it genuinely, that it expresses who you truly are. Yet beneath this preference lies a hidden force, a compulsion shaped not by free will, but by familiarity, something ingrained so deeply that it masquerades as your authentic self. This is the essence of the compulsion disguised as preference. When we say we prefer something, we assume it springs from a conscious, autonomous decision. But in reality, our preferences are often shaped by patterns repeated so frequently, they become second nature. These patterns are scars left by past experiences, traumas, and conditioning, wounds that imprint on the psyche and then hide behind the comforting mask of familiarity. Think of a person who constantly chooses toxic relationships, always drawn to the same type of partner who treats them poorly. They claim they prefer these partners, that these are their true tastes. But what if the preference is really a compulsion rooted in old scars? The familiar pain feels safe because it is known, while unknown healthier alternatives trigger fear or uncertainty. The choice is less about free will and more about an unconscious pull toward the familiar wound. This dilemma runs deep in human behavior. Neuroscience shows that the brain favors patterns that are well-worn neural pathways, even if they are harmful. The brain's predictive nature seeks the expected over the uncertain, prioritizing familiarity as a survival mechanism. The repetition of familiar emotional states, even negative ones, creates a sense of control and predictability, which the brain craves. So, the preference to repeat old patterns is less a true choice and more a compulsion born from neural habit. On a societal level, people cling to familiar cultural norms, beliefs, and ideologies, even if those frameworks limit growth or perpetuate suffering. These familiar structures become scars etched into collective identity. Challenging them feels like risking the self, while conformity feels like comfort. The illusion of preference masks a deeper compulsion to remain within the safe boundaries of the known. In childhood development, this dynamic is clear. Children internalize caregivers' behaviors and emotional patterns, forming attachments that become the foundation for adult preferences. If those early attachments are scarred by inconsistency, neglect, or trauma, adults may compulsively recreate those relational dynamics, mistaking them for true preferences. The familiar wound becomes the signature they carry, unaware it is a scar, not a self. Even simple daily routines illustrate this dilemma. People often choose the same foods, same routes, same habits, not necessarily because they truly prefer them, but because they are familiar and easy. Stepping outside these routines can feel disorienting or threatening. So the compulsion to return to familiar choices feels like an act of self-preservation, disguised as preference. The emotional weight of familiarity binds us. Like a shadow, it follows us, sometimes unseen, sometimes deeply felt. It limits freedom by narrowing the field of possible choices to what we already know, rather than what might truly serve us. This is the trap, mistaking the scarred pathways of past experience for authentic self-expression. Healing this dilemma requires awareness and courage. To recognize that what feels like preference may actually be a compulsion is the first step toward freedom. It invites us to question what is truly ours and what is inherited from past wounds. It opens space for new experiences, new choices, and new expressions of self, beyond the shadows of familiarity. Imagine learning to distinguish between the scar and the signature, the wound that shaped you and the authentic self that can grow beyond it. This journey is neither simple nor linear. It requires confronting discomfort, uncertainty, and the unknown. But in doing so, you reclaim agency over your preferences and reshape your identity from compulsion to conscious choice. Ultimately, the compulsion disguised. As preference reveals a profound truth, our sense of self is often entangled with the echoes of our past. To live authentically, we must look beyond the surface of familiarity and question what choices arise from true desire versus what repeats old scars. This reflection is not just a psychological insight. It is a path toward liberation, allowing us to redefine who we are, not by our wounds, but by our conscious will to choose differently. In embracing this awareness, the familiar loses its grip, and preference becomes a genuine signature of the self, free, evolving, and alive. The time-lagged self-loop. You think you decide, that there is a stable you making choices in every moment. But what if I told you that the you who decided is already gone the moment you act? That the version of yourself who made the choice no longer exists when the decision manifests in reality? This is the paradox of the time-lagged self-loop, a haunting puzzle about identity, agency, and what it really means to be the author of your actions. When you pause to decide, say, whether to speak up or stay silent, to reach out or withdraw, that mental moment feels whole and singular. There's a you sitting at the helm, weighing options, feeling intentions, forming desires, but that you is fleeting. By the time your body moves, your voice forms words, or your fingers type on the keyboard, the self who decided has already dissolved into the past. The present self who acts is a new version, slightly altered by the flow of time, by shifting moods, external influences, and subconscious undercurrents you might not even notice. Can that extinct you claim authorship over the living one? Can a ghost of a self that no longer exists truly own the reality unfolding right now? This question shakes the very foundations of free will and selfhood. Because if the decider is gone, then who is acting? Who is responsible? And what does it mean for your sense of control? Let's dive deeper. Imagine a scenario. You decide to quit your job. In your mind, you visualize a moment of courage, clarity, and liberation. You weigh pros and cons, you feel your resolve harden. That mental snapshot is the you who decides, clear, focused, intentional. But when the moment comes to speak to your boss, hesitation creeps in. Emotions swell, doubts surface. The words you utter might differ from the intentions you held moments before. That person speaking, the one feeling anxious or conflicted, is not exactly the you who decided. That you was a mental construct, a time-stamped self now vanished, while the living self grapples with new realities. This temporal disconnect between decision and action exposes a profound discontinuity. The mind is never a fixed point, but a flowing river, constantly changing. Decisions are like pebbles dropped into that river, creating ripples that evolve unpredictably as they move downstream. The self that chose is upstream, the self that acts is downstream, and the space between is filled with the turbulence of time, change, and unpredictability. Neuroscience provides a chilling insight here. Studies measuring brain activity reveal that decisions can be detected milliseconds before we become consciously aware of them. This means the you who feels in control is already a step behind your unconscious brain's preparation. Your sense of agency, that feeling you are authoring your actions, is in a way a retrospective construction. Your mind stitches together a narrative after the fact, linking intention to action, even though the actual initiation began earlier, outside conscious awareness. This paints the time-lagged self-loop not only as a philosophical puzzle, but as a neurological fact. The deciding self is always out of sync with the acting self. Each moment of conscious choice is already old news by the time you live it. You are chasing a version of yourself that no longer exists, a ghost self pulling strings from the past, trying to claim authority over the present. What does this mean for responsibility, for blame and praise? If the self who chose is extinct, how do we hold someone accountable for actions that unfold after their disappearance? This challenges our social contracts and internal moral frameworks. We expect consistency, coherence, and continuity of identity. Yet the time-lagged self-loop reveals that identity is fractured across time, slipping between versions of selfhood that never fully align. Think about addiction, for example. The self who decides to quit is not the self who succumbs in the moment of craving. The decision to abstain belongs to a past self, hopeful, determined, while the present self, overwhelmed by impulse and compulsion, acts contrary to that choice. The loop traps individuals in cycles of failure and remorse, as extinct selves attempt to command living ones they no longer control, or consider moments of sudden rage or panic. You decide to stay calm, but the instant you feel overwhelmed, your body acts before your mind catches up. The you who chose peace has vanished, replaced by a reactive self with its own logic and survival mechanisms. This split between decision and action reveals how fragmented the self can be. Yet, the time-lagged self-loop also offers a strange kind of freedom. If the self who decides is not the self who acts, then the rigid notion of a fixed identity dissolves. You are not a single, unchanging agent, but a fluid process, a series of selves connected by memory, intention, and narrative. This opens space for change, growth, and reinvention, because each new acting self is a chance to rewrite the script, to choose differently from extinct versions. However, this freedom demands a radical acceptance of uncertainty. You cannot rely on past decisions to fully control present actions. You must learn to navigate the ever-shifting landscape of selves within you, to embrace impermanence and flux. This is both terrifying and empowering. Terrifying because of the loss of control, empowering because it means identity is not fate. Philosophers have long debated this paradox. Heraclitus said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, capturing the flow of identity through time." The time-lagged self-loop is a modern expression of this ancient truth. The you who decides is always a river upstream, already changed by the time the water reaches your feet. Practically, how do you live with this knowledge? Start by cultivating mindfulness, the ability to observe yourself moment to moment without attachment. Notice the gap between intention and action, the subtle shifts in mood, thought, and impulse. When you recognize the time-lagged self-loop, you can loosen its grip. You see that the self is not a static commander, but a dynamic process. You learn to respond with curiosity rather than judgment to your own inconsistencies. Therapeutic approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, emphasize this fluidity of self. They teach that you are not your thoughts or past decisions, but the observer of an ongoing process. Embracing this can reduce suffering caused by feeling trapped by extinct selves trying to control the present. In the end, the time-lagged self-loop reveals that authorship of the self is less about control and more about narrative weaving. You are both the storyteller and the story, a series of moments linked by memory, anticipation, and imagination. The you who decides is a necessary fiction to create coherence, but it is not a fixed author sitting outside time. So, when you act, remember, the you who decided is already a ghost. The living self stepping into the moment is both inheritor and creator of that decision. Identity is a dance between past intentions and present actions, a loop with no beginning and no end. Understanding this loop invites you to stop chasing the vanished you and start embracing the fluid, unfolding self that lives now, imperfect, uncertain, and endlessly alive. This is the paradox and the power of the time-lagged self-loop. It strips away illusions of a singular, eternal self, replacing it with a profound truth, that who we are is always becoming, never finished, and always more than any single decision can claim. The narrative binding problem. We live through stories. Every day we arrange the events of our lives into narratives, coherent, structured, meaningful. We tell ourselves who we are, where we came from, and where we're going through the threads of story. But this weaving of life into story creates a profound tension, one that traps freedom beneath the weight of its own plot. Stories demand structure. They have beginnings, middles, and ends. They rely on cause and effect, on logical progression. Characters must behave consistently, events must align, and the plot must hold together. This structure gives stories meaning, but it also confines them. Spontaneity, the unpredictable spark of true freedom is squeezed out. The plot becomes armor, rigid, protective, but suffocating. When you shape your life as a story, you are bound by the same rules. Your identity becomes a character in a plot you believe you own, but did not write fully. Your choices, your actions, must fit into the narrative you accept. To change too radically would break the story. The story demands coherence, consistency, a neat cause and effect chain. So free will, the possibility of surprise, of acting outside the script, quietly withers. Imagine a person who has always seen themselves as the strong survivor. Every decision is filtered through this lens. They reject help, avoid vulnerability, and push forward because that's the plot they've accepted. But what if true freedom required breaking that role? What if healing, surrender, or change meant rewriting the story? The narrative binding problem says that to stay the protagonist of your own life, you often must sacrifice the freedom to rewrite your plot in real time. Psychologists call this narrative identity. It is essential for coherence and meaning, but it comes at a cost. The mind resists dissonance, inconsistency, unpredictability, because stories cannot handle chaos. So we become trapped in self-reinforcing loops, acting, thinking, and feeling according to the story's demands, not necessarily according to spontaneous will. This binding effect also appears in social roles and cultural narratives. Expectations, norms, traditions, all stories bigger than ourselves, wrap around us like invisible chains. They provide structure, belonging, and purpose, but limit freedom by defining what choices are acceptable within the grander plot. The tragic irony is that while stories help us make sense of our lives, they also cage us. We live plot armor lives, where the supposed hero's destiny is scripted, and the illusion of free will is maintained by the pressure to act consistently within that script. The more coherent the narrative, the less room for authentic spontaneity. This is why moments of profound transformation feel like a breaking of the story. To truly change, to rewrite your narrative, is to face chaos and uncertainty. The mind resists this because it threatens the foundation of identity. It is easier to endure stagnation than to risk the collapse of the self-story. But liberation lies beyond the narrative binding problem. It is found in embracing paradox, the coexistence of story and spontaneity. We can honor the stories we live by, while recognizing they are constructs, not absolute truths. We can become conscious authors, willing to edit, revise, and even discard old plots to open space for new actions and freedom. This requires courage, because breaking plot armor leaves us vulnerable. Without a stable narrative, meaning dissolves. But from that vulnerability emerges creative freedom, the possibility of living a life not bound by old stories, but by new, ever-evolving ones, shaped by authentic choice. In the end, the narrative binding problem reveals the paradox of freedom itself. We need stories to live, to understand, to belong, to survive. But stories limit us. True free will is the ability to step outside the story's grip, to act beyond the plot, to create meaning spontaneously. This is the challenge and the gift of human consciousness, to live in story, but not be imprisoned by it, to hold a narrative lightly, as a tool rather than a cage, to weave the tale of life with threads of freedom that escape the binding grip of plot armor. The deterministic creativity paradox. Your imagination feels like the ultimate sanctuary of freedom, a realm where anything is possible and your mind can roam unbound. Yet, beneath this thrilling illusion lies a paradox as profound as it is unsettling. Even your imagination plays by rules. It dances within the boundaries set by the language, memories, experiences, and neural pathways you carry. This is the deterministic creativity paradox. The idea that creativity itself is not a realm of infinite freedom, but a complex unfolding of predetermined patterns. Imagine the colors you paint with, the words you string together, the stories you weave. All these tools come from the structure of your mind, shaped by genetics, culture, language, and personal history. When you dream up new ideas, you are recombining fragments already present inside you. You cannot think outside the language of your thoughts, because language provides the very framework that makes thought possible. It is the lens, the architecture, and the rules that shape every mental image and concept you create. Consider language as the canvas for your imagination. Each word, metaphor, and grammar rule limits and guides what you can conceive. The notion of thinking outside the box assumes a box that already exists. Your mental framework's built from years of learning and absorbing cultural norms. Even when you try to break free, your mind works with the symbols and concepts it knows, building new patterns from familiar building blocks. For example, a composer dreaming of a symphony doesn't create sounds ex nihilo. They arrange notes, harmonies, and rhythms learned through study and experience. Their new compositions are novel permutations, yet grounded in deterministic rules of music theory and cultural tradition. A painter's brush is guided by color theory, perspective, and the tools of the medium. Even wild fantasy worlds are made from the soil of real-world experiences and language. Neuroscience shows that creativity arises from complex but deterministic brain processes. Neural networks activate, pattern match, and combine ideas guided by prior knowledge and emotional states. The brain's plasticity allows for novelty, but within constraints. Your imagination, as free as it feels, is a dance of possibility governed by these internal rules. This paradox does not diminish creativity. Instead, it reveals the deep structures that enable it. Creativity is a powerful force emerging from constraint. The limitations of language and thought do not imprison imagination. They shape it, giving it form and meaning. Like a poet constrained by meter or rhyme, you find freedom through mastery of the rules rather than in their absence. Yet, the question lingers. If your dreaming is bound by deterministic rules, how free is it really? If every imaginative thought is influenced by inherited language, culture, and biology, can you claim true freedom in your mind? Or are you simply rearranging the echoes of what has come before, trapped inside a mental system shaped by forces beyond conscious control? Philosophers have long debated free will versus determinism. The deterministic creativity paradox brings this age-old struggle into the realm of imagination, showing that even our most intimate mental explorations are entangled with necessity. Your free creativity is paradoxically both uniquely yours and deeply conditioned. However, recognizing this paradox invites a richer understanding of your creative power. Freedom in imagination may not be about escaping rules, but about knowing them deeply and exploring their edges. It's about dancing with constraints to create something meaningful, surprising, and new. It is the tension between order and chaos that fuels originality. Imagine a writer who masters the rules of storytelling, language, and human psychology. Within this mastery, they craft worlds that feel fresh and alive. Their creativity is deterministic in its foundations, but limitless in expression. The paradox is not a cage, but a crucible for transformation. In practical terms, embracing this paradox means cultivating awareness of your mental frameworks and conditioning. It means experimenting, learning new languages, engaging with different cultures, and exposing yourself to diverse ideas to expand the rules you operate within. By broadening your internal toolkit, you enlarge the space in which your imagination can roam. The deterministic creativity paradox also reminds us to be gentle with ourselves. Feeling stuck or uninspired is often a signal of rigid mental rules at work. Change those rules, learn a new skill, read an unfamiliar genre, try a novel perspective, and you shift the deterministic patterns that guide your imagination. Ultimately, your dreams are both free and determined, spontaneous and structured, original and recycled. This paradox reflects the beautiful complexity of human consciousness, where freedom emerges from necessity, and creativity blossoms within boundaries. So, as you imagine your next idea, ask yourself, what rules am I following without realizing? How can I engage with those rules differently? And what new possibilities open when I dance intentionally within the paradox of deterministic creativity? In this interplay lies the magic of human imagination. Not absolute freedom, but a freedom born from understanding and embracing the structures that shape our minds. The deterministic creativity paradox challenges you to rethink what it means to dream and to discover that true creative freedom may reside precisely in the artful navigation of boundaries you once thought limiting. The fixed reaction architecture. Your body reacts before your mind rationalizes. So, are you choosing or just narrating chemistry in formal language? This question strikes at the core of human experience, challenging the very notion of conscious choice. Every moment, your nervous system processes countless stimuli, triggering reflexes, emotional surges, and physiological shifts in milliseconds. long before your conscious mind has time to catch up, interpret, or decide what to do. In essence, your body acts first, and your mind follows, crafting a story that frames those reactions as deliberate choices. Consider the reflex to pull your hand away from something hot. There is no conscious deliberation. Your spinal cord sends signals faster than the brain can formulate thoughts. This is a primal example of the body reacting independently, almost automatically. Now, extend this idea to more subtle, complex behaviors, the gut feelings, the emotional impulses, the rapid physiological responses that shape how you experience the world and prepare you to respond. Neuroscience shows that these bodily reactions occur before conscious awareness. Your mind then assembles the narrative, claiming authorship. This architecture, where physical and chemical processes predate rational thought, raises profound questions. When you choose to stay calm in a stressful moment, or decide to speak kindly, is that a spontaneous act of free will, or are you merely narrating after the fact a biochemical chain reaction that has already set your course? Your brain chemistry, neurotransmitters, hormones, electrical impulses, operates behind the scenes, steering attention, mood, and behavior in ways you may not consciously control. The idea that conscious choice is a retrospective narration is supported by studies revealing that brain activity predicting decisions happens before you're aware of making them. The sensation of, "I chose this," may be a sophisticated internal story designed to integrate unconscious processes into your self-identity. This doesn't mean you are powerless, but it does mean that the traditional view of a singular, autonomous self-making choices is oversimplified. Your experience of agency may thus be a translation, a verbal and conceptual labeling of bodily chemistry rendered into the language of intention and purpose. This narrative is crucial for social interaction, moral responsibility, and self-understanding. But it is important to recognize it as a constructed layer atop the complex, often automatic biological foundations of behavior. Understanding this fixed reaction architecture invites a shift in perspective. Freedom may not lie in controlling every impulse or thought, but in becoming aware of the narratives you create around your bodily reactions. It opens space for mindfulness and reflection, allowing you to influence future responses by reshaping the stories you tell yourself. In this light, your choices are less about direct causation and more about interpretation, a dance between chemistry and consciousness, between automatic reactions and deliberate meaning-making. The question is not whether you choose or react, but how you navigate the space where these processes intertwine, crafting a life that feels authentically yours amid the complex interplay of body and mind. The two-option trap. Imagine standing before two doors. You are told you have the freedom to choose whichever door you prefer. The choice feels empowering, like the core of your free will in action. Yet, both doors were built, positioned, and designed by someone else. The options themselves are crafted, limited, and controlled. This is the essence of the two-option trap, the illusion of freedom hidden inside a carefully constructed cage. At first glance, having any choice seems like liberation. We often equate choice with freedom, believing that to decide between options is to exercise autonomy. But what if the very options available are predetermined by external forces with specific agendas? Your selection then becomes an act within constraints that you did not set. The boundaries of your freedom are defined by someone else's vision, and no matter which door you pick, you remain inside the prison they constructed. This dilemma echoes across history and society. Political systems often present two main parties, each with different rhetoric, but converging interests. Voters are told they have a choice, a fundamental freedom in democracy. But if both parties serve the same underlying power structures, the choice is a mirage, a facade that channels dissent into controllable pathways. The electorate's sense of freedom is preserved, but real autonomy is curtailed. The corporate world mirrors this trap. Consumers choose between brands, products, or services, believing in the freedom of the market. But often, the options come from the same conglomerate or follow the same scripted patterns. The selection feels personal, but is framed by marketing strategies designed to limit real alternatives. Your preference is shaped inside a box where freedom is confined to picking between two sides of the same coin. On a psychological level, the two-option trap shapes everyday decisions. When faced with two starkly opposed options, say, conformity or rebellion, safety or risk, people feel pressure to pick a side. But both options may come from internalized beliefs or societal conditioning planted by others. The real freedom to create a third path, or to question the framework entirely, is rarely presented or encouraged. Your will is funneled into binary choices, a prison of duality disguised as liberty. Consider relationships where one must choose between two incompatible futures, prescribed by family, culture, or circumstance. The illusion of choice persists, but both paths may limit personal growth or fulfillment. The cage is gilded, but still a cage. Philosophically, this dilemma invites us to question the nature of freedom itself. True freedom is not merely the ability to pick from pre-made options, but the power to question, create, and transcend the options presented. When choice is reduced to a binary, freedom is constricted and shaped by external architects. Even technology reveals this trap. Algorithms suggest content, news, or products tailored between two appealing alternatives. The system curates choices to keep users engaged, but within safe boundaries. The freedom to explore beyond the algorithm's design is restricted, masked by the comfort of simple decisions. Breaking free from the two-option trap requires awareness of the architect behind the choices. It means stepping back to examine the frame, to realize that true agency lies not in selection alone, but in the ability to redefine the options or reject the framework entirely. This recognition can be unsettling. It demands confronting the limits imposed on autonomy and the subtle control embedded in systems we trust. But it also opens the door to genuine liberation, where freedom is not a scripted selection, but a creative act beyond imposed binaries. The trap shows that freedom inside a prison is an illusion, no matter how attractive the options seem. Selection without sovereignty is just participation in a designed game. To reclaim true freedom, we must look beyond the two doors and question who built the walls around us. In this understanding lies both the challenge and the possibility to move from being passive choosers in a confined space to active creators of new paths. The two-option trap is not just a critique of external control, it is an invitation to imagine freedom beyond choice itself. A freedom that arises when we see the cage and refuse to play by its rules. So, next time you face what seems like a free choice between two options, pause and ask, who designed these options? And what might freedom look like if I stepped outside the prison altogether? The predictive self-construction. You believe you act freely, guided by an inner self who knows exactly who you are. But what if that self you trust so deeply, your self-image, is not born from choice or authenticity, but from survival? What if the very identity steering your decisions was constructed not to empower, but to protect? This is the unsettling truth at the heart of the predictive self-construction. The self you act upon is a survival-built illusion, not a sovereign truth. From the earliest moments of your life, your mind began to piece together an image of who you are. This image, this internal model, isn't just a reflection, it's a prediction. A forecast your brain made to navigate an unpredictable world. The predictive self was shaped by necessity, built brick by brick to maximize your chances of safety, acceptance, and endurance. It's less a portrait of your authentic essence, and more a fortress built against threat. Consider the child who grows up in a household where love is conditional. They learn quickly that to be safe, they must perform certain roles: obedient, invisible, pleasing. Their brain predicts that survival depends on being what others want. This prediction solidifies into self-identity. So, the child becomes not simply who they are, but who they must be to survive. The self-image is no longer a free construction. It's a cage forged by fear. The predictive self functions like a finely tuned algorithm, anticipating the social, emotional, and physical demands around you. It forecasts how others will respond, how dangers might manifest, and how to adapt accordingly. This model becomes the lens through which you interpret the world and your place in it. You act according to the expectations of this predicted self, not the infinite possibilities of who you might truly be. But here lies the paradox. Survival and sovereignty often diverge. Sovereignty, the freedom to be fully and authentically oneself, requires shedding these survival layers. It demands the courage to dismantle the predictive self's safe illusions and face the vulnerability of authentic existence. Yet, survival instincts resist this unraveling, for to let go risks exposure and pain. The survival-built self clings fiercely to its script, commanding your actions and thoughts. This dynamic explains why so many feel trapped by their identities. The me who acts is not the sovereign self choosing freely, but a construct designed to keep you alive in hostile environments. When you act, it's often this predictive self responding, not your deepest truth. It's why patterns repeat, why fears persist, why breaking free feels impossible. Neuroscience echoes this reality. Your brain's default mode network constantly simulates future scenarios, predicting outcomes to guide behavior. Your sense of self emerges from these simulations, an ongoing story your mind tells itself to anticipate and control experience. This predictive mechanism was essential for evolution, but can now become a prison, limiting who you believe you can be. Imagine a person who believes they are not creative. This belief might have formed as a survival strategy, avoiding risks or criticism in early life. Their predictive self constructed this identity to minimize harm. Even if deep inside there is creative potential, the survival-built self blocks expression because it anticipates threat from vulnerability. The person acts in alignment with this constructed self-image, reinforcing it through behavior and external feedback. This loop of prediction and action sustains itself. The predictive self anticipates outcomes, guides behavior to confirm its forecast, and then interprets experiences through its narrow lens. You become locked in a cycle where survival-built identities masquerade as your true self. The sovereignty to choose beyond these predictions becomes obscured by the weight of survival. But sovereignty is possible. It begins with awareness, recognizing that the self you act upon is not fixed or inherently you. It's a model, a survival tool that once served but may now limit. When you see the predictive self as a construct, you create space to question its commands. You start to differentiate between survival responses and authentic desires. This awakening is often uncomfortable. Letting go of survival-built roles can trigger anxiety, confusion, even grief for the self you thought you were. But it's also liberating, opening doors to new ways of being. The sovereign self is not born overnight, but cultivated through courage, reflection, and practice. Techniques like mindfulness, therapy, and creative expression help loosen the grip of predictive constructions. They invite you to explore facets of yourself beyond survival strategies. You learn to listen to authentic impulses beneath conditioned patterns, and to act from a place of choice, not just prediction. This process is revolutionary because it shifts the source of identity from reactive survival to active sovereignty. It transforms the relationship between past, present, and future selves. Instead of being bound by the survival stories of yesterday, you become the author of new narratives rooted in freedom and authenticity. Philosophically, this aligns with existential ideas that selfhood is fluid, a continuous becoming rather than a static being. The predictive self is a necessary stage, but sovereignty calls us beyond it, to embrace uncertainty, imperfection, and the vastness of who we might become. In practical terms, every moment becomes an opportunity to choose differently, to act not from survival predictions, but from sovereign intention. It's in these moments that the self truly expands, breaking free from the invisible chains of constructed identity. The predictive self-construction is a reminder and a challenge. It tells us that what we think we are is deeply conditioned, rooted in survival mechanisms designed for a different time and purpose. But it also offers hope, that through awareness and courage, we can step beyond these confines, reclaim our sovereignty, and live lives authored by our truest selves. So when you next act, ask yourself, am I following a survival script or choosing sovereignly? Am I driven by who I was told to be to stay safe, or by who I want to become freely and fully? The answer lies in the space between prediction and action, a space where true selfhood waits to be claimed. The pre-desire programming. Desire feels like the purest expression of our freedom. We believe we want what we want because it arises from the deepest parts of ourselves, our true essence, our soul's calling. But what if that desire, that sense of longing, is not truly ours? What if it is pre-programmed, implanted before we ever consciously chose it? From the moment we are born, forces shape us. Evolution, culture, family, and society plant seeds of desire in the fertile soil of our minds. Evolution wired us to crave survival, comfort, status, and reproduction. basic desires embedded deep in our genetic code. These primal urges are not personal choices, but inherited programs designed to keep us alive and passing on our genes. Layered atop this are the invisible hands of culture and marketing. Advertisements, social media, peer pressure, all orchestrate what we come to want. The perfect body, the luxury car, the ideal job. These desires are curated, crafted, engineered by billion-dollar industries. They mimic and hijack our primal wiring, redirecting desire toward consumption and conformity. The self that desires is shaped by narratives outside our control. Family, too, imprints desires early on. Parental expectations, inherited beliefs, religious values. These are seeds sown before our consciousness blooms. We grow to want what pleases or honors those who shaped us, sometimes at the cost of our own authentic inclinations. This pre-desire programming calls into question the very idea of free will in our wants. If the seed was never ours to plant, how free is the fruit? Is the longing we chase a genuine call of our essence, or a whisper planted by external forces? Consider the irony. We spend lifetimes pursuing desires that were never truly born from us. We climb ladders, chase ideals, collect symbols of success, all following scripts written in us before we could read. We celebrate freedom of choice while living desires curated by survival imperatives, social constructs, and commercial manipulation. Neuroscience adds weight to this paradox. Brain imaging shows that desire-related activity often ignites before conscious awareness. Our brains react to cues, advertisements, social signals, conditioned triggers, before we feel the conscious pull of wanting. Desire arises in shadows before light. Yet, the paradox doesn't end in despair. Recognizing pre-desire programming is the first step toward reclaiming agency. Awareness allows us to question, to differentiate between planted cravings and authentic longing. It invites a radical inquiry. Which desires truly reflect who I am, beyond inherited scripts and conditioned urges? This requires deep inner work and courageous honesty. It means peeling back layers of social conditioning and evolutionary survival imperatives to find the raw, original self beneath. It means distinguishing the noise of external influence from the subtle call of personal meaning. The fruit of desire can still be yours, but only if you tend the garden consciously. If you become the gardener who weeds out programmed wants and nurtures authentic growth. Desire, once planted unknowingly, can be pruned and reshaped into a freedom-infused expression. In this light, free will and desire is not the naive belief that wants arise spontaneously or purely from the soul. It is the mature recognition that desires are complex tapestries woven from inherited threads and personal meaning, and the power lies in choosing which patterns to follow, which to unravel. The pre-desire programming paradox invites us to stop chasing blind cravings and begin the art of conscious desire, to understand that even the deepest longings are dialogues between nature, nurture, and self-awareness. To find freedom not in denying influence, but in embracing our role as active creators of what we choose to want. And in that creation, in that choice, lies the true fruit of freedom, a desire born not by accident or implantation, but by conscious, courageous, and authentic becoming. The genetic disobedience error. You inherit more than just your physical appearance. Embedded deep within your DNA are the blueprints of personality traits, tendencies, fears, and predispositions that shape how you think, feel, and behave. This inheritance is automatic, unconscious, and beyond your control. Yet, despite this profound genetic influence, many of us find ourselves trapped in a relentless internal dialogue, punishing ourselves for not choosing better, as if our struggles were purely matters of willpower. This is the heart of the genetic disobedience error, the painful disconnect between inherited biology and the illusion of free choice. Imagine your personality as a complex tapestry woven from countless threads, many of which were spun long before you existed. Your genetic code handed down a set of instructions that influence your temperament, your emotional reactions, your stress responses, and even your resilience. These factors operate beneath conscious awareness, subtly guiding how you perceive the world and how you respond to its challenges. Consider fear, for example. Some fears are hardwired through evolutionary survival mechanisms encoded in your genes: fear of heights, loud noises, or the unknown. These fears were vital for ancestral survival, but can manifest today as anxiety or avoidance, often seemingly irrational. You did not choose this wiring, it was passed down. Yet, when fear limits your actions, you might blame yourself for weakness or failure, not recognizing the inherited nature of these responses. The same applies to personality traits like introversion, impulsivity, or sensitivity. Scientific research shows that up to 50% or more of personality variability is genetically influenced. You might struggle with traits you find frustrating or limiting, believing they are personal flaws to overcome. But they are part of your genetic inheritance, not mistakes you made. This genetic influence extends to mental health vulnerabilities. Conditions such as depression, bipolar disorder, or anxiety disorders often have genetic components. Carrying these predispositions is not a choice, nor a moral failing. Yet, societal stigma and internalized judgment cause many to punish themselves for experiencing symptoms beyond their control. This punishment is the genetic disobedience error in action. The paradox deepens when you realize that despite this genetic blueprint, human behavior is not strictly determined. Environment, upbringing, personal experiences, and conscious effort interact dynamically with genetics to shape who you are. This means you can influence the expression of genetic tendencies, sometimes dramatically. But the starting point, the raw material, is not chosen. Imagine a person prone to impulsivity inherited through their genes. They may work hard to develop strategies to pause and think before acting. The effort is real and valuable, yet the baseline wiring is an inherited challenge, not a flaw of character. When this person berates themselves harshly for mistakes, they enact the genetic disobedience error, ignoring the biological origins of their tendencies while demanding freedom from them. Philosophically, this error reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of free will. We often assume that if we had enough willpower or moral strength, we could overcome any internal obstacle. But if part of who we are is encoded biologically, it challenges this simplistic notion. Then true freedom involves recognizing these constraints without self-condemnation. Awareness of the genetic disobedience error can foster compassion, both for yourself and for others. When you understand that difficult traits and fears may be inherited, it becomes easier to accept imperfections without judgment. This acceptance does not mean resignation. Rather, it opens the door to self-care, tailored strategies, and realistic expectations. In therapy and personal growth, this insight is transformative. It shifts the focus from punitive self-criticism to compassionate understanding. You begin to work with your biology rather than against it, adapting your environment and habits to support your inherited wiring instead of fighting a futile battle against it. Moreover, this error highlights the limits of blame. When you punish yourself for traits embedded in your DNA, you overlook the complex interplay between nature and nurture that shapes behavior. You become caught in an impossible game of self-reproach over factors beyond your free choice. Society, too, must reconsider how it frames responsibility and character. Stigmatizing people for behaviors rooted in genetic predispositions perpetuates the genetic disobedience error on a collective scale, deepening shame and isolation. Ultimately, the question, what part of DNA was free, invites a profound reflection on identity and autonomy. Your genetic inheritance is a starting point, a foundation laid by ancestors, not a sentence to limitation or self-punishment. Freedom lies in embracing this foundation with honesty, compassion, and an open mind, learning to navigate your unique wiring with wisdom rather than guilt. So, when you feel overwhelmed by tendencies that seem to resist change, pause and ask, which of these are truly my choices, and which are echoes of a genetic legacy I did not choose? Can I meet my inherited traits with kindness instead of condemnation? In this reframing lies the possibility of genuine freedom, not from your biology, but within it. The genetic disobedience error is the silent struggle of countless minds, a battle between inherited wiring and the desire for self-mastery. Recognizing it is the first step toward healing the disconnect and finding peace with the complex tapestry of self, woven not only by choice but by the invisible hands of DNA. The resistance reflex reversal. Even rebellion is a script. When you resist conditioning, you're still reacting to it, which makes resistance part of the machine. This insight shakes the foundation of what we consider freedom and defiance. The impulse to rebel, often celebrated as the ultimate act of autonomy, may itself be an echo of the very system you oppose. Resistance, then, is not outside the conditioning but woven into its fabric, a predetermined move in the dance of control. Think about it. Conditioning shapes desires, fears, and beliefs. When a system or culture pressures you to think or behave a certain way, the urge to resist arises as a response to that pressure. Your mind and body, conditioned by past experiences and external influences, generate rebellion not from an unconditioned space, but from within the web of those very influences. Resistance becomes a reaction, a calculated countermove, anticipated and integrated by the machine. This phenomenon is reflected in psychological theories and social dynamics. For example, in marketing, attempts to create anti-establishment products are often co-opted into mainstream culture, turning rebellion into a marketable trend. In politics, dissenting voices can be absorbed, neutralized, or even weaponized by the systems they challenge. Your act of defiance might feel spontaneous and radical, but it can also be part of a feedback loop designed to maintain equilibrium, preventing true disruption. Neuroscience supports this idea as well. Brain pathways activated during acts of resistance overlap significantly with those involved in routine reactions to stimuli. The so-called free choice to oppose something often emerges from neural circuits already shaped by conditioning. Your rebellion is scripted by the patterns etched into your brain through upbringing, culture, and experience. Recognizing resistance as part of the machine is not to say it is meaningless or futile, but to deepen our understanding of freedom's complexities. It invites a question. Can there be resistance that transcends conditioning? If every act of opposition is anticipated, is there a space for genuine autonomy? Perhaps the key lies in awareness. By observing how your resistance arises, by examining the scripts you follow, even in rebellion, you might glimpse moments of choice that aren't purely reactive. Awareness can create cracks in the machinery, spaces where new, unpredictable actions emerge. The resistance reflex reversal challenges us to see rebellion not simply as opposition, but as part of a larger system, one we must understand intimately if we hope to transcend it. In the end, rebellion, like compliance, may be a chapter in the story of control, written by the machine itself. But within that story lies the possibility of rewriting, of inventing scripts that surprise the machine, and, in doing so, redefine what it means to resist. The influence saturation spiral. Every choice you make, what you watch, what you read, what you listen to, feels like an expression of your free will. You believe you are the author of your tastes and desires, but the truth is far more complex, even unsettling. You are caught in the influence saturation spiral, a self-perpetuating loop where what you consume shapes who you are, yet what you are already shaped to want dictates what you consume. It's a spiral with no clear beginning or end, pulling you deeper into patterns of influence that feel like choice, but are, in reality, conditioned response. Imagine standing before an infinite library, but the books available are not random. They are selected based on the parts of you already known, the preferences you have demonstrated, the beliefs you hold. Every time you pick a book, it nudges you toward more of the same, reinforcing a pre-existing pattern. Your choices feed the system, and the system feeds your choices. It's a dance of influence so intimate that the line between you and the external world blurs until it vanishes. This spiral begins with your history, your experiences, your culture, your social environment that have already shaped your desires and curiosities. These shape your initial appetite for certain kinds of content, ideas, or media. But once you start consuming, that intake alters your mind and emotions, reshaping your preferences further. The content you consume floods your perception, saturating your mental landscape with familiar signals, making you crave more of the same. What started as a choice slowly becomes a script you follow automatically. Consider social media platforms. Their algorithms are designed to maximize engagement by feeding you what you've already liked, shared, or lingered on. The more you consume a certain type of content, whether political views, entertainment, or lifestyle ideas, the more the platform serves it back to you, deepening your immersion in that niche. Your worldview narrows, your emotional responses become predictable, your intellectual horizon contracts. The spiral tightens. This spiral isn't neutral. It has consequences. The feedback loop reinforces biases, polarizes opinions, and diminishes exposure to diversity. You become a product of accumulated influences, many outside your conscious awareness. Your identity, your beliefs, your values begin to reflect not just your internal core, but the echoes of what you've consumed. You are saturated by influence, but awareness of this spiral can be a tool for disruption. When you recognize that your desires are shaped by past influences, you gain the power to question them. You can seek inputs that challenge your patterns rather than confirm them. Breaking the spiral requires conscious effort to diversify what you consume, to expose yourself to unfamiliar perspectives and experiences. This is not easy. The spiral's pull is strong because it offers comfort, familiarity is soothing, and repetition builds neural pathways that make certain thoughts and feelings automatic. Stepping outside requires discomfort, curiosity, and sometimes confrontation with uncertainty. Yet, it is essential for growth, creativity, and true autonomy. Psychologists call this phenomenon the confirmation bias in cognition, the tendency to favor information that confirms existing beliefs. The influence saturation spiral is a lived, experiential manifestation of that bias. It's not just what you think, it's what you immerse yourself in daily, shaping your emotions, your social circles, even your aspirations. In marketing and politics, this spiral is exploited deliberately. Messages are tailored to saturate specific groups, reinforcing loyalty or outrage. This strategic saturation manipulates identity formation, turning consumption into a weaponized tool for control. The spiral becomes a trap, blinding individuals to alternative truths and possibilities. Yet, paradoxically, the spiral also reflects a fundamental human need: to belong, to feel understood, to find coherence. We seek patterns because chaos is threatening. The influence saturation spiral offers a sense of stability. Even if it confines us, it becomes both a comfort zone and a cage. Breaking free doesn't mean rejecting all influence. That's impossible. Instead, it means cultivating awareness about how influence operates within you. Developing a metacognitive perspective, where you watch your own patterns of consumption with curiosity, detachment, and critical thought. This lets you steer the spiral rather than be swept by it. Creative practices, meditation, and deliberate exposure to novelty can expand your cognitive and emotional bandwidth, loosening the spiral's grip. They help you rediscover the space between influence and choice, the space where genuine agency lives. In this space, you can redefine what you want before the spiral tightens its hold. You can rewrite your internal algorithm, allowing new inputs to reshape your desires, values, and identity. This dynamic process is not linear but circular, like the spiral itself. But with intentionality, you direct its movement toward expansion rather than saturation. Ultimately, the influence saturation spiral reveals a profound truth about human nature and society. Identity is not born in isolation, but emerges from constant interaction with the environment. We are co-creators of ourselves and the world, endlessly influenced and influencing in turn. Recognizing the spiral is an invitation to reclaim the narrative of your mind, to choose with awareness, to seek with openness, to consume with discernment. It is the difference between being a passive vessel filled by external currents and an active participant shaping the flow of your own consciousness. So, next time you reach for that next video, article, or conversation, pause and reflect. Am I feeding the spiral, or am I steering it? Am I trapped in cycles of influence, or am I expanding my world with intention? The choice lies in that moment, and with it, the power to break or bind the spiral of influence that shapes who you are. The memory editor paradox. Imagine for a moment that every decision you make is deeply rooted in your memories, those snapshots of your past that you believe to be true, reliable, and unchanging. Yet beneath this belief lies a profound paradox. Memory is not a fixed record of reality, but a fluid, ever-shifting story your brain continuously edits and rewrites. This is the core of the memory editor paradox. You do not act on facts, but on stories your mind constructs, stories that evolve, change, and sometimes deceive. Our memories shape our identity, our beliefs, and the way we interact with the world. When faced with a choice, you instinctively reach into your mental archive for past experiences to guide you. But Neuroscientific research reveals that memory is not a perfect playback of events. It is a reconstructive process, prone to errors, distortions, and embellishments. Every time you recall a memory, your brain subtly alters it, influenced by your current emotions, beliefs, and desires. Imagine remembering a conversation that felt hostile. The memory is tinged with feelings of anger or betrayal. Yet, if you were to recall that memory tomorrow, your brain might emphasize different words, tones, or expressions, coloring the event in a new light. Over time, these edits accumulate, turning a complex encounter into a simplified story of conflict. Your decisions, then, are made not from an objective truth, but from a narrative shaped by shifting perspectives. This paradox becomes more troubling when we consider how memories influence future actions. You might avoid certain situations or people based on past facts stored in memory, yet those facts are often unreliable. The mind edits memories to fit current self-conceptions, protect self-esteem, or align with your worldview, creating a feedback loop where memory shapes identity and identity reshapes memory. Consider traumatic memories. Trauma survivors often recall events with intense emotional weight, but may have fragmented or distorted details. Therapy sometimes involves reprocessing memories to reduce their hold. This shows memory's malleability, how our stories of the past can be softened or altered to change present behavior. On a societal level, collective memory works similarly. Histories, traditions, and cultural narratives evolve, emphasizing some events while erasing others, crafting a story that serves current social or political needs. Our decisions as communities, nations, or cultures depend on these collective memories, which are themselves edited fictions. Philosophically, the memory editor paradox challenges the very foundation of knowledge and identity. If our memories are unreliable storytellers, then the self, built upon these memories, is also fluid and fragmented. Your sense of continuity through time, the feeling that you are the same person across years, depends on memories that are stories, not immutable facts. In practical terms, this paradox urges caution and humility. Recognizing memory's fallibility can soften rigid judgments and open space for empathy. When someone acts based on a memory that conflicts with your own, remember that both memories are narratives shaped by internal editing. The truth is not a fixed point, but a moving target. Even more, it encourages self-reflection. To what extent are your choices shaped by edited stories rather than raw experience? Can you question the memories that guide you, seek alternative perspectives, or reframe your internal narratives? Such awareness can expand freedom, allowing you to act with greater clarity rather than being bound by potentially distorted recollections. This paradox also highlights the power of narrative. Our lives are stories we tell ourselves. While these stories are not literal facts, they shape emotions, motivations, and behaviors profoundly. Understanding the memory editor. Your paradox means embracing the creative power of memory without mistaking it for objective truth. Ultimately, you are a storyteller, a memory editor, continuously weaving the past into the present to guide your path forward. This process is both a limitation and a gift. Your memories are not perfect records, but flexible, evolving tapestries of meaning. Acting on stories rather than facts is part of the human condition, inviting us to balance trust in our memories with an openness to revision and growth. So, when you make your next decision, remember this paradox. You are acting not on unchangeable facts, but on memories edited by your mind. By embracing this, you gain a deeper understanding of yourself and the complex, beautiful nature of human cognition. The thought authorship. Mirage. Thoughts appear in your mind like unexpected guests, unbidden, spontaneous, and often surprising. You didn't summon them consciously, they simply emerged from the depths of your consciousness. Yet, almost instinctively, once a thought crosses your awareness, you reach out and claim it as your own creation. This is the essence of the thought authorship mirage, a subtle but profound illusion where noticing a thought is mistaken for authoring it. Imagine standing by a riverbank, watching leaves drift downstream. The leaves float by without your control, but as soon as one catches your eye, you feel it belongs to you. Similarly, thoughts arise in the vast river of your mind. Independent of your will, your awareness registers them, but that doesn't mean you conjured them from nothing. Noticing is a passive act. It happens after the thought has already taken shape. Neuroscience confirms this experience. Brain imaging shows that neural activity linked to decision-making and thought initiation often occurs milliseconds before you become consciously aware of the thought. The mind's machinery works beneath the surface, producing mental content that then surfaces into your conscious awareness. Your sense of being the author is a retrospective story your brain tells itself to create coherence. This illusion is deeply ingrained because humans seek a sense of agency and control. Claiming authorship over thoughts reinforces the narrative of a cohesive self, the I that thinks, decides, and acts. It supports personal identity and responsibility. Yet, the Mirage hides the truth that much of mental life unfolds autonomously, outside deliberate control. Consider intrusive thoughts, those unwelcome ideas or images that suddenly appear without invitation. You certainly don't want to claim authorship for these, yet noticing them is unavoidable. They arise independently, highlighting that thoughts can be strangers rather than self-generated visitors. The automatic nature of thought challenges the simplistic idea that all thoughts are consciously authored, the thought authorship. Mirage also explains why we sometimes feel overwhelmed or confused by our mental chatter. If thoughts arrive unbidden, then battling every unwanted idea as ours becomes exhausting. Recognizing that noticing is not creating allows a shift. You become a witness, observing mental phenomena without unnecessary identification or judgment. This perspective is central in mindfulness practices. By cultivating awareness of thoughts as transient events passing through consciousness, you loosen attachment to them as personal property. You see that thoughts are phenomena arising and dissolving, not always reflections of your true self or intentions. Philosophically, this challenges notions of free will and selfhood. If thoughts are not always authored consciously, then the self is less an originator and more a stage on which mental events play out. You are the observer of a mind that often runs on autopilot, with conscious authorship being just one part of a larger process. Yet, this does not negate responsibility. While not all thoughts are authored, how you respond to them matters. You may not create every idea, but you choose which to entertain, which to challenge, and which to let go. This choice reflects the interplay between automatic mental processes and conscious agency. The Mirage invites humility about mental control and patience with yourself. When troubling thoughts arise, instead of self-blame for creating them, you can acknowledge their spontaneous nature and focus on your response. This reduces guilt and opens pathways for healthier mental habits. In relationships, understanding the thought authorship Mirage helps us see that others' thoughts and reactions often arise without deliberate intent. This awareness fosters empathy and reduces conflict fueled by assumptions about intentions. Ultimately, the thought authorship Mirage reveals the mystery of consciousness, a dynamic interplay where awareness follows thought, and the sense of authorship is a narrative we construct. By seeing this clearly, you step into a deeper relationship with your mind, one grounded in observation rather than ownership. So, next time a thought pops up uninvited, pause and notice. Did I create this thought, or am I simply witnessing its arrival? In that pause lies a doorway, a chance to disentangle identity from mental noise and discover a more spacious awareness beyond the Mirage. This subtle shift, from claiming every thought as authored to witnessing them as transient phenomena, opens a new horizon of mental freedom. The thought authorship. Mirage invites you to become not just a thinker, but a conscious observer of the thinking process itself. The ethical puppet illusion. You think you're moral by choice, but your code of right and wrong was installed long before reason was possible. This unsettling truth reveals how deeply our sense of ethics is rooted not in conscious deliberation or rational judgment, but in the earliest, most primal layers of human experience. Before you could weigh arguments or analyze consequences, before logic entered your mind, your brain was already wiring itself with basic moral frameworks, rules encoded by evolution, culture, and early social conditioning. From infancy, you absorb the world through emotions and mimicry. Your earliest experiences teach you what feels safe or threatening, rewarding or punishing. These emotional imprints form the foundation of your ethical compass long before you develop the capacity to question or reflect. Neuroscience shows that many moral intuitions arise from automatic processes in the brain's limbic system, the part associated with emotion and survival, rather than from the prefrontal cortex, where conscious reasoning occurs. Imagine morality as an operating system installed deep in your neural hardware. It guides your judgments and behaviors almost like software running silently in the background. When you declare a decision moral or immoral, you're often articulating the output of this pre-installed system rather than a fresh, reasoned choice. The sensation of moral agency, the feeling that you are consciously choosing right from wrong, is often a post hoc interpretation layered over these instinctive responses. This doesn't mean morality is mere programming without meaning or flexibility. Cultures evolve, societies debate, and individuals reflect, reshaping moral codes over time. But the illusion lies in believing that your personal morality springs solely from autonomous reasoning. In reality, it is scaffolded by inherited beliefs, emotional conditioning, and social reinforcement that predate conscious thought. Consider how deeply ingrained taboos operate. You might reject certain behaviors instinctively, even before you can explain why. Often these instincts trace back to survival strategies honed over millennia. The moral mind is less a rational judge and more a product of ancient programming, interpreting experiences through a lens shaped by history and biology. This perspective challenges traditional views of ethics as purely rational deliberation and invites humility. Recognizing the ethical puppet illusion can foster greater empathy and self-awareness. It reminds us that judgment, both of ourselves and others, often arises from forces beyond immediate conscious control. Yet, within this framework lies the possibility for growth. Awareness of our pre-installed moral software allows us to examine, question, and even reprogram our ethical beliefs. Through reflection, dialogue, and exposure to diverse perspectives, we can refine the codes that govern us, making space for conscious moral evolution. Ultimately, the illusion of moral choice is both a challenge and an opportunity. It confronts us with the depth of unseen influences shaping our sense of right and wrong, while opening a path toward deeper understanding and authentic ethical engagement. You may be a puppet of inherited codes, but recognizing the strings is the first step toward cutting them and claiming a truer form of moral agency. The hyper-self-awareness freeze. Imagine standing on the edge of a stage, ready to speak or move, but suddenly your mind turns inward with intense scrutiny. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought becomes a spotlight of examination. This is the hyper-self-awareness freeze, the paradox where heightened self-monitoring, which feels like wisdom and control, instead traps you in a cage of inaction. The very awareness you believe empowers you becomes a silent jailer, turning possibility into paralysis. When you act naturally, your body and mind operate fluidly, often guided by intuition, habit, or subconscious flow. You move without overthinking, speak without rehearsing every word internally, and decide without getting lost in endless internal debate. But as self-awareness intensifies, your inner observer grows louder, dissecting each impulse, questioning motives, analyzing risks. This flood of reflection disrupts the smooth current of action, creating a bottleneck in decision-making. Psychologically, this phenomenon is closely tied to what some call paralysis by analysis. The brain's executive functions become overwhelmed by excessive metacognition, thinking about thinking, resulting in delayed or inhibited action. What feels like intelligence, the ability to monitor and evaluate, turns into an obstacle. Instead of freeing you, this hyper-awareness traps you in cycles of doubt, second-guessing, and fear. Consider athletes who perform best when in the zone, a state of flow where self-consciousness fades and action becomes instinctive. When they become overly aware of their movements or mistakes, performance often deteriorates. The same applies to artists, speakers, or anyone engaged in spontaneous creativity. Hyper-self-awareness interrupts the natural rhythm, causing hesitation and loss of confidence. Social anxiety is a powerful example of this freeze. People become hyper-aware of how they appear to others, obsessively monitoring facial expressions, tone, and body language. This heightened internal surveillance leads to awkwardness, stammering, or retreat. The mind's attempt to control the social situation through awareness backfires, producing exactly the opposite result: inaction or clumsy action. Philosophically, the hyper-self-awareness freeze reveals the tension between consciousness and freedom. While self-awareness is often celebrated as a path to wisdom, it can also become a trap when it morphs into over-control. Freedom to act requires a certain surrender, a letting go of constant monitoring, a trusting the body and mind to engage without interruption. Neuroscientifically, this relates to the prefrontal cortex's role in self-regulation and executive control. When overactive, it can suppress more automatic, fluid systems in the brain, stalling action. The balance between reflective thought and instinctive response is delicate. Tipping too far into reflection can immobilize behavior. This dilemma also illustrates the illusion of control. We believe that by scrutinizing every detail, we gain mastery over ourselves. Yet, the hyper-awareness paradoxically diminishes mastery by eroding spontaneity and naturalness. The mind's vigilant guard becomes an overbearing jailer. Breaking free from this freeze demands awareness of the paradox itself. Recognizing when self-monitoring turns excessive allows one to consciously shift toward acceptance and flow. Practices like mindfulness meditation, breathing techniques, or engaging fully in the present moment help reduce overthinking and invite action without judgment. Furthermore, embracing imperfection and uncertainty can dissolve the fear that fuels hyper-awareness. When you accept that mistakes, awkwardness, and vulnerability are part of being human, the need for constant internal surveillance diminishes. Action becomes possible again, not because you control every thought, but because you allow yourself to be imperfectly present. The hyper-self-awareness freeze is not a failure of intelligence, but a misapplication of it. A brilliance turned inward to such intensity that it blinds and stalls. The challenge is to cultivate a balanced awareness, enough to guide and reflect, but not so much that it chokes the very actions it intends to empower. In this tension lies a profound insight about the human condition. Intelligence alone does not guarantee freedom or effectiveness. Sometimes, true wisdom is knowing when to step back from the mirror, silence the inner critic, and trust the fluid dance of thought and action. So next time you feel stuck in your own head, caught in loops of self-scrutiny, remember this paradox. Your awareness is not your enemy, but when it freezes you, it disguises itself as intelligence. The path forward may be not deeper analysis, but a gentle release, a letting go into action beyond the prison of hyper-self-observation. The calibration bias loop. You believe that every time you adjust your behavior, your thoughts, or your decisions, it's because you're learning, because reality is giving you honest feedback. But what if the outcomes you rely on to self-correct are themselves shaped, filtered, or controlled by external systems designed to influence you? What if your adjustments are not truly your own, but responses engineered by forces manipulating the feedback you receive? This is the paradox at the core of the calibration bias loop. A feedback cycle where you think you're calibrating yourself, but in truth, you're being calibrated by the very systems providing your outcomes. Imagine a sailor navigating by the stars, believing the heavens guide their course. But what if those stars were rearranged by unseen hands? The sailor adjusts their sails, their route, their speed, all based on the star patterns they trust. Yet every adjustment pulls them further into a path someone else has set. They think they're steering themselves, but they're dancing to a tune written in a sky they cannot control. This loop unfolds everywhere in modern life, from social media algorithms that curate what you see, to corporate performance metrics that define success, to cultural norms that shape behavior. Systems frame the outcomes that you interpret as feedback. You respond to those outcomes, tweaking your choices, your identity, your effort. The system then shifts, alters, or reinforces these feedbacks, directing your course subtly but relentlessly. The calibration bias loop undermines the very notion of autonomy. If feedback is distorted or controlled, can you trust that your corrections reflect truth? Or are you merely adapting to a constructed reality? Your sense of growth, of progress, of self-improvement may be an illusion, a refinement within a cage, not a path to freedom. Consider education systems where grading standards fluctuate based on administrative priorities rather than pure merit. Students adjust study habits to fit these shifting criteria, believing their effort controls their success. But when the metrics change, or when biases creep into evaluation, their self-correction serves the system's agenda more than their authentic development. In workplaces, performance reviews often reflect more than just individual output. They incorporate politics, managerial preferences, and organizational goals. Employees self-correct based on these outcomes, molding their behavior to fit a desired image or corporate narrative. Are they growing or being shaped? The loop blurs the line. Psychologically, this creates a dangerous cycle of dependency. You rely on external feedback to define yourself, but that feedback is not neutral. It's a filtered mirror, bending your reflection to fit a predetermined shape. Your internal compass spins, recalibrating endlessly, but never reaching true north. The loop thrives because it exploits human nature. We are wired to learn from consequences, to adapt for survival. Feedback is essential for growth, but when feedback is manipulated, adaptation becomes a mechanism of control. You adjust not to authentic reality, but to the system's projections. This manipulation is often invisible, embedded in layers of complexity and opacity. It can be as subtle as social approval patterns or as overt as surveillance and data profiling. Systems collect data on your behavior, adjust parameters, and feed you outcomes engineered to elicit desired responses. The calibration bias loop becomes a closed circuit of influence. Breaking free requires critical awareness. You must question the feedback you receive. Where does it come from? Who controls it? What agendas does it serve? Developing skepticism about the sources and structures behind outcomes allows you to regain agency. Mindfulness can help disentangle this loop. By cultivating an observer stance toward your reactions and adjustments, you begin to notice patterns beyond immediate feedback. You sense when you're tuning yourself to an external script rather than your own internal truth. In practice, this means diversifying sources of feedback, seeking independent perspectives, and developing internal criteria for evaluation. It means reclaiming your calibration process by anchoring it in self-knowledge, values, and authentic experience, rather than relying solely on system-generated outcomes. Philosophically, the calibration bias loop challenges our understanding of free will and self-mastery. It asks, can true self-correction exist in a world where feedback is mediated and manipulated, or is autonomy always negotiated within structures of influence? The answer is complex. Absolute freedom may be an ideal, but awareness grants you the power to navigate constraints skillfully. By recognizing the loop, you can consciously choose when to adapt and when to resist, when to trust external outcomes, and when to rely on inner wisdom. In essence, the calibration bias loop is both a trap and an opportunity. It reveals how control can masquerade as feedback, but also how insight can transform that feedback into genuine growth. Your journey is to discern the difference between adjusting yourself and being adjusted, and to reclaim the power to steer your own evolution. So next time you find yourself recalibrating based on results, pause and reflect. Am I tuning my instrument to authentic resonance or simply echoing a system's tune? The space between adjustment and being adjusted is the frontier of self-mastery, and within it lies the possibility of true autonomy. The alien self hypothesis. What if everything you think you own, the very thoughts, feelings, and impulses you call yours, is not truly yours at all? What if your mind is less a sovereign pilot and more a receiver, tuned to invisible transmissions broadcast through the vast unknown of biology and chance? This is the core of the alien self hypothesis, a radical idea that shakes the foundation of identity, autonomy, and free will. We like to believe our thoughts arise spontaneously from a unique inner self, a personal consciousness guiding our lives. But what if those thoughts are not self-originated, but rather signals intercepted by a biological receiver shaped by evolutionary chance? Imagine your brain as a radio, wired perfectly not to generate the music, but to catch the frequency of countless sources, some internal, some external, some mysterious. Science reveals how deeply our biology shapes cognition. Neural pathways, chemical cascades, genetic predispositions, all form a complex, finely tuned system that interprets and modulates inputs into coherent experience. But none of these biological mechanisms claim ownership of thought content. They simply process, filter, and relay. The content itself, the ideas, the urges, the images, may emerge from sources beyond the individual's conscious will. Consider how thoughts sometimes appear unbidden, intrusive, or strange, as if coming from outside the familiar self. How dreams seem to be scripted by an unknown author. How sudden inspirations strike like external messages. The alien self hypothesis suggests these are not anomalies, but fundamental truths. Your mind is a composite of transmissions, shaped by biology but not authored by it. This raises a profound question. If the thoughts you experience are transmissions, who or what is actually piloting this body? Is there a central on behind the scenes? Or is identity itself an emergent illusion, a narrative stitched together by receiving and interpreting these signals? Philosophy has long wrestled with this puzzle. The idea of a self as a stable, autonomous pilot dissolves under scrutiny. Instead, the self may be a dynamic, shifting interface, a passenger perceiving through a biological vessel that's simultaneously transmitter and receiver. Evolutionary chance further complicates this. The particular biological wiring you possess is a cosmic accident, a fragile tuning fork that catches a unique set of transmissions. Another body, another brain, another constellation of neurons would interpret and receive entirely different signals. Your self is thus contingent, a resonance born of biology and circumstance, not about a sovereign commander. This hypothesis is unsettling because it undermines the core assumption of agency. If thoughts are received transmissions, how free are you truly? How much control do you have over the narratives you live, the decisions you make, the person you believe yourself to be? Yet, there is an invitation here, not just disillusionment. If your thoughts are transmissions, awareness of this can shift your relationship to them. You can become the conscious listener, discerning which signals to amplify, which to ignore. You can tune your receiver intentionally, cultivating clarity amid the noise. The alien self-hypothesis challenges the illusion of total control and points instead to a delicate dance between receiver and signal, between biology and the mysterious currents beyond. It suggests that identity and agency are less about ownership and more about interpretation and response. Ultimately, this raises a cosmic mystery. Who or what is sending these transmissions? Are they echoes of ancestral memory, collective consciousness, universal intelligence, or something utterly unknown? The question transcends science and philosophy and touches the edges of spirituality and existential wonder. In this vast unknown, the body is the vessel, the brain the tuner, and the self a passenger navigating a sea of invisible signals. Freedom may lie not in controlling all transmissions, but in embracing the role of mindful receiver, choosing which voices shape the journey and which fade into silence. The alien self-hypothesis invites you to question the source of your own mind, to explore the possibility that you are both receiver and interpreter in a universe far stranger than imagined. It calls for humility, curiosity, and courage to navigate the uncharted realms within. The retargeted identity trap. You are in a constant state of transformation, continuously updating yourself to adapt, improve, and grow. Every choice you make, every habit you cultivate, every goal you pursue feels like a step toward a better version of yourself. Yet, beneath this restless drive lies a trap, a retargeted identity shaped not by your authentic desires, but by metrics designed and imposed by others. This is the retargeted identity trap, a subtle yet powerful force that shapes who you become, optimizing you for roles and values you may never have truly chosen, leaving originality behind. Imagine your identity as a sculptor's clay, malleable and flexible. Society, culture, employers, social media, and even well-meaning mentors hand you molds, standards, expectations, and benchmarks that define what success, worth, or happiness should look like. You shape yourself to fit these molds, constantly adjusting your attitudes, skills, and behaviors. But these molds were not crafted from your inner core. They are templates crafted to serve external agendas and norms. For example, consider the metrics of productivity that dominate modern life. You measure yourself by hours worked, tasks completed, or social media likes. You optimize your routines, your diet, even your sleep, all to maximize these external indicators. Yet, in chasing these targets, your sense of self becomes fragmented, a patchwork of borrowed ideals rather than an original, cohesive identity. The trap deepens in personal branding and online presence. You craft your persona to attract followers, employers, or approval, often guided by algorithms and trends beyond your control. This feedback loop reinforces behaviors that please the system, not necessarily those that resonate with your authentic self. The you displayed to the world is thus retargeted to meet invisible objectives designed by platforms and audiences, not by your own values. Psychologically, this creates a dissonance. You feel pressure to evolve, but the path is predetermined by others' criteria. Self-improvement becomes a journey along predefined tracks, leaving little room for spontaneous, genuine self-expression. You become a product optimized for consumption, adaptation, and efficiency, but stripped of originality and true personal meaning. The retargeted identity trap also operates in social and cultural norms. Expectations about how you should behave based on gender, class, ethnicity, or age subtly channel your identity updates. You internalize roles assigned to you, updating yourself to fit social scripts rather than discovering unique pathways. Even well-intentioned advice like, "be your best self," can feed this trap when best is defined externally. The challenge is that without conscious reflection, you rarely ask, whose metrics am I optimizing for? Are these standards truly mine, or are they handed down and accepted uncritically? This leads to a profound question. What does it mean to be original in a world that constantly retargets your identity? Originality requires stepping off the treadmill of external metrics and reconnecting with your intrinsic values, passions, and intuition. It means resisting the urge to conform blindly and daring to define your own criteria for growth. Breaking free is difficult because the retargeted identity trap is pervasive and often invisible. It masquerades as progress and self-care, but can hollow out your sense of authenticity. Awareness is the first step, recognizing when your updates align with your true self and when they serve imposed agendas. Practically, this involves critical self-inquiry. When you adopt a new habit or goal, pause and ask, why this? Whose standard am I following? Does this reflect what I truly want, or am I optimizing for approval, status, or survival? Cultivating this habit can reveal when your identity updates are genuine expansions versus retargeted modifications. Creativity and original self-expression flourish when you reclaim authorship of your identity updates. This may mean embracing imperfection, contradiction, and unpredictability rather than conforming to neat metrics. It may mean risking disapproval to honor your unique voice. In relationships, the trap manifests when you change yourself to fit others' expectations, rather than being seen and accepted as you are. Recognizing the retargeted identity pattern helps build healthier boundaries and authentic connections. Philosophically, the retargeted identity trap challenges modern notions of the self as a project to be optimized. It invites a more nuanced view. The self is both fluid and grounded, influenced yet sovereign. True growth emerges from integrating external feedback with deep internal guidance. Ultimately, escaping this trap is not about rejecting all external influence, but about choosing which influences serve your authenticity and which diminish it. It is about balancing adaptation with originality, efficiency with essence. So, as you navigate your journey of becoming, ask yourself, am I updating toward who I truly am, or who others want me to be? Am I optimizing metrics set by invisible architects, or crafting my own unique design? In this questioning lies the path out of the retargeted identity trap and toward a life of genuine originality. The reaction-only framework. You don't act, you react to trauma, trend, or fear. The illusion is in mistaking motion for intention. This harsh truth cuts through the comforting narrative that you are an autonomous agent, steering your life with deliberate purpose. Instead, much of what we call action is a cascade of responses triggered by forces beyond conscious choice, echoes of past wounds, social pressures, and primal survival instincts. From the moment trauma imprints itself on your nervous system, it shapes the ways you respond to the world. The fight, flight, or freeze reactions become default patterns, often firing without your awareness. You might think you're making intentional decisions, but in reality, you are navigating a labyrinth built from pain and fear, where reactions substitute for genuine agency. Similarly, trends, those invisible currents of culture and collective behavior, pull your responses like tides. You adapt, mimic, conform, believing these choices are your own. But beneath the surface, your reactions align with the shifting patterns of society, shaped by desires for belonging, approval, or avoidance of conflict. Fear, the primal architect of survival, governs countless reactions. It hijacks rational thought and compels motion, sometimes freezing you in place, sometimes pushing you toward decisions you later question. Fear's influence is insidious. It masquerades as urgency, convincing you that reacting quickly is synonymous with acting wisely. The reaction-only framework reveals how often our movements are reflexive rather than creative. The mind crafts stories afterward, narratives that dress up reactions as intentions, giving a false sense of control and meaning. This narrative stitching is vital for psychological coherence, but obscures the deeper reality. Much of life's motion is reactive, a dance choreographed by past and present conditions rather than free will. Recognizing this is both unsettling and liberating. It invites us to pause beneath the surface noise of reactions and examine the roots of our impulses. Through mindfulness and self-awareness, we can begin to distinguish between automatic responses and conscious acts. This discernment creates space to reclaim agency, transforming reaction into intentional action. In this light, freedom is not the absence of influence, but the cultivation of awareness. Learning to recognize the chains of trauma, trend, and fear, and choosing, even moment by moment, how to move within or beyond them. The illusion fades when we see clearly that motion alone is not enough. Intention, reflection, and choice must accompany it to create authentic action. The language constraint fallacy. Imagine trying to grasp an idea that slips through your mind like mist, vague, elusive, beyond words. This is the heart of the language constraint fallacy, the belief that you cannot think what you cannot name. Language, while a powerful tool, also confines your thoughts, making them prisoners inside a cage built by vocabulary and grammar. Your choices, then, become acts of translation within this cage, rather than true acts of original creation. Language shapes how we perceive, categorize, and understand reality. From early childhood, the words we learn frame the concepts we can entertain. Without words for a feeling, a concept, or an experience, it becomes difficult, even impossible, to fully grasp or communicate it. The boundaries of language become the boundaries of thought itself, limiting not just expression, but cognition. Philosophers like Ludwig Wittgenstein famously proposed, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." This suggests that what cannot be articulated cannot be truly thought. If language is a cage, then thought is confined within its bars. Your mind must navigate, interpret, and translate experiences into the vocabulary it has, restricting creativity and freedom. Consider emotions that defy simple description. Complex feelings like nostalgia, awe, or certain shades of grief. Many cultures have unique words for experiences others lack names for, opening conceptual doors otherwise closed. Without a word, the feeling remains fuzzy, intangible, almost invisible to conscious thought. This constraint extends to decision-making. When you face choices, you rely on concepts and categories formed by language. Your mind translates ambiguous impulses into known terms to decide. True creation, an act of forming genuinely new ideas or desires, becomes rare, replaced by selection from pre-existing linguistic categories. Neuroscience echoes this. Language structures cognitive processes. The brain links concepts to linguistic symbols, and thought patterns often follow linguistic syntax. Nonverbal thought exists, such as visual or sensory impressions, but complex abstract reasoning relies heavily on language's scaffolding. Creativity sometimes breaks free by inventing new words, metaphors, or linguistic structures. Poetry, art, and metaphor attempt to expand the cage, creating new ways to think and feel. Yet even these are constrained by the limits of shared language. They strive to push boundaries, but remain within the realm of translation. This fallacy also shapes cultural perspectives. Societies with limited vocabularies for certain concepts may struggle to conceptualize them fully. For example, the absence of words for mental health conditions in some languages limits recognition and treatment. Language, thus, not only confines thought, but can constrain social progress. Psychologically, the language constraint fallacy shows how self-understanding is bound to the words you possess. When you struggle to articulate internal conflicts or desires, the lack of language hampers insight and choice. You might feel trapped inside vague emotions you cannot name or decode, limiting your ability to act freely. Yet, paradoxically, thought also exists beyond language. Infants, animals, and even adults experience sensations and emotions prior to naming them. Dreams, intuition, and unconscious processes operate without words. But bringing these raw experiences into conscious thought and choice requires translation into language, a process that filters and shapes meaning. This invites reflection on the nature of freedom and creativity. Are your choices truly free acts of creation? Or are they translations of pre-existing linguistic and cultural scripts? To what extent can you transcend the cage of language to access new modes of thought? Practices like meditation, art, or movement explore nonverbal cognition, seeking to bypass linguistic constraints. They offer glimpses of thought unbound by words, suggesting that while language cages much of our mind, it is not the entirety of it. In embracing this fallacy, you become aware of the limitations language imposes, but also of the power you hold to expand your conceptual world. Learning new languages, exploring metaphor, and engaging in creative expression are ways to stretch the cage, making space for novel thoughts. Ultimately, the language constraint fallacy reveals a deep tension. Your mind is both limited by language and empowered by it. Choice, then, is often less about pure creation and more about skilled translation, navigating the known words to express the unknown self. Recognizing this invites humility and curiosity. Humility in accepting that some thoughts remain beyond words, and curiosity to seek new linguistic horizons that broaden your cognitive landscape. Your freedom grows as you expand the cage, not by breaking it, but by adding new bars, new doors, new rooms inside it. So, as you think, decide, and create, remember, language is both your prison and your key. Choice is translation, not pure invention, and your task is to become a master translator of the vast unspoken realms within you. The invisible influencer paradox. You believe in free will. You believe that your choices are your own, born from a place of conscious intention and autonomous thought. But the truth is far more elusive. The forces that shape your decisions, your desires, your very sense of self, are often invisible, woven into the fabric of your upbringing, embedded in societal structures, and encoded deep within unconscious biases. This is the core of the invisible influencer paradox. You are most controlled by what you cannot see, yet you call it freedom because the leash is transparent. From the moment you take your first breath, you are immersed in an environment that molds you. Your family's values, cultural norms, language patterns, and social expectations imprint themselves on your developing mind. These early influences become invisible frameworks that guide how you perceive the world and your place within it. You carry these invisible scripts like a shadow, unaware they limit your true autonomy. Structures, economic, political, social, shape the options available to you and the outcomes you anticipate. They define what is possible and what is taboo, who is heard, and who is silenced. These systems are often so normalized and ubiquitous that they feel like natural laws rather than constructs designed by human hands. You navigate these invisible currents, believing you are steering your own ship, but the tides push you in predetermined directions. Then there are unconscious biases, those mental shortcuts formed through years of experience, media exposure, and cultural narratives. They operate beneath awareness, influencing your judgments and actions without your knowledge. You might think you choose fairly or objectively, but invisible prejudices skew your perceptions, preferences, and behaviors. These hidden influencers are powerful precisely because they escape your conscious scrutiny. This paradox reveals a cruel irony. Your freedom is a mirage sustained by the transparency of your leash. Because you cannot see the forces that constrain you, you mistake constraint for choice. You believe you are autonomous, when in reality, you are dancing to a choreography scripted by invisible puppeteers. Think about a fish swimming in water. It believes it moves freely, but it cannot perceive the water itself, the medium that enables and limits its motion. You are like that fish, immersed in invisible environments that shape and contain you. Your will is exercised within a field of influence so vast and subtle that you take it for granted. This doesn't mean you are powerless, but it demands humility and vigilance. Recognizing the invisible influencer paradox is the first step toward reclaiming agency. It calls for deep self-examination. Questioning inherited beliefs, exposing structural constraints, and uncovering biases hidden in the shadows of your mind. Awareness allows you to peel back layers of influence and glimpse the mechanisms steering your decisions. It invites you to confront uncomfortable truths about how much of your free will is scripted by unseen forces. This confrontation can be disorienting, even painful, but it is necessary for genuine freedom. Philosophers have long wrestled with this paradox. Free will may be limited by conditions beyond conscious control, yet the subjective experience of choice remains real. The invisible influencer paradox resides at this tension between internal experience and external reality, between feeling free and being shaped. In practical terms, breaking free requires expanding your field of vision. Seek perspectives outside your usual frame. Engage with voices and experiences different from your own. Challenge assumptions embedded in your culture and upbringing. Question your gut reactions and explore why you feel drawn or repelled by certain ideas. Education, dialogue, and reflection are tools to illuminate the invisible. They help make the transparent leash visible enough to loosen its grip. Meditation and mindfulness cultivate the capacity to observe your own mind and its hidden currents, increasing the space between stimulus and response. Systems change slowly, but individual awareness can ripple outward, challenging structural invisibilities. When enough people see the invisible influences shaping them, collective transformation becomes possible. The paradox then shifts from invisible control to conscious participation. Ultimately, the invisible influencer paradox teaches that freedom is not absolute, but a continuous process of uncovering and negotiating constraints. It calls us to live with curiosity and courage, always probing the hidden forces at work within and around us. So when you act next, pause and ask, whose influence guides this choice? What unseen hands shape my desires and beliefs? Recognizing the invisible influencers does not erase choice but deepens it, turning transparent leashes into cords of conscious connection and illusions of freedom into acts of real agency. The logic preconditioning glitch. We pride ourselves on reason, logic, the power of rational thought to guide our decisions and uncover truth. Reason feels like the pinnacle of freedom, the ability to think independently, to analyze, to conclude without bias. But what if this reasoning itself is trapped inside a preconditioned system? What if every conclusion we reach is just the output of equations running on preloaded code, inherited from learning and environment rather than born from pure, free thought? Our brains do not reason in a vacuum. From early childhood, we absorb logical structures, rules, cause and effect chains, problem-solving strategies from our culture, education, and experience. These form vast logic trees inside our minds, frameworks that shape how we interpret data, connect ideas, and reach conclusions. This is what I call the logic preconditioning glitch. When we reason, we navigate these trees. Our thoughts branch through predefined paths, following algorithms embedded in language, culture, and upbringing. The logic we wield is inherited, not invented anew with each thought. Our conclusions are the end nodes on pathways mapped by prior learning. This glitch reveals a profound limitation. Reasoning is less a creative act of freedom and more a mechanical unfolding of preloaded instructions. We believe we solve problems independently, but the patterns of our solutions are encoded in the systems we inhabit. We run equations without questioning the code itself. For example, consider how different cultures approach reasoning. Some emphasize circular logic, others linear causality. Some prioritize communal consensus, others individual deduction. Each logical system is a different program loaded into the mind. Reason does not transcend culture, it is bound by it. Even scientific reasoning, the supposed gold standard of objectivity, relies on foundational assumptions and accepted paradigms. The frameworks within which scientists think are themselves preloaded. Paradigm shifts occur only when new frameworks replace old, but the glitch remains. Reasoning always follows some logic tree. This has consequences for free will. If our conclusions are outputs of preset logic running on inherited code, how free is the thought? How original is the insight? The logic preconditioning glitch suggests that reason, far from liberating, often reinforces patterns, biases, and blind spots encoded before conscious awareness. The glitch also explains why debates often reach impasses. When parties reason within different logic trees, their conclusions seem incompatible, not because logic fails, but because their underlying code differs. Each side runs different equations, so the outcomes cannot align. But awareness of this glitch can transform our relationship to reason. It invites humility about our conclusions, openness to alternative logic systems, and curiosity to examine the underlying code itself. To question not just what we think, but how and why we think in certain ways. This deeper meta-reasoning, thinking about thinking, can create space for genuine freedom. It allows us to recognize the logic preconditioning glitch and explore beyond our inherited programs. We can experiment with new logic trees, hybrid approaches, or even illogical intuition. In that exploration lies the possibility of transcending the glitch, not by rejecting reason, but by expanding its scope and questioning its foundation. True freedom in thought may not be pure independence, but conscious navigation and rewriting of the logic codes we inherited. The logic preconditioning glitch challenges our faith in reason's purity. It reveals that our minds are programmed systems running inherited code, producing outputs shaped more by past downloads than original creation. Yet, within this revelation is hope. By becoming aware programmers of our own reasoning, we open paths to greater freedom, creativity, and understanding. In the end, the glitch is not a failure, but an invitation to see reason not as absolute liberation, but as a tool shaped by context, to master the code we run, and, through that mastery, reclaim freedom of thought beyond preloaded logic trees. The emotional override problem. You like to think that your decisions emerge from careful reasoning, that logic guides your choices and your mind weighs pros and cons before settling on a course of action. Yet, beneath this comforting narrative lies a hidden reality. The emotional body makes the decision first, and your reasoned story comes afterward to justify it. This is the emotional override problem, a fundamental disconnect between how decisions feel like they are made and how they actually unfold within you. Imagine a courtroom where the judge makes a verdict long before the lawyers present their arguments. Your emotions are that judge, swift and often unconscious, issuing rulings based on gut feelings, fears, desires, and past experiences. The rational mind then acts as the defense attorney, crafting a narrative that explains and legitimizes the emotional verdict. Reason is powerful, but in this process, it is secondary, a post hoc justification, rather than the originator of choice. Neuroscience backs this up with fascinating findings. Studies reveal that the brain's emotional centers, like the amygdala, activate before the areas associated with logical analysis. In fact, brain scans show decisions form milliseconds before you become consciously aware of them. Your rational explanations are often confabulations, stories constructed after the fact to make sense of an instinctive impulse. Take a common example: choosing to avoid a social event. Your emotional body might register anxiety, discomfort, or fear, pushing you away without deliberation. Then, your reasoning mind fills in explanations. I'm too busy, or it won't be enjoyable, to justify what was already decided emotionally. The story comforts you and others, masking the primacy of feeling in the choice. This override can lead to confusion and self-doubt. You might believe you are making thoughtful decisions, only to discover later that emotions had silently steered you all along. When your rational story conflicts with emotional reality, it creates internal tension, sometimes guilt or regret. The emotional override problem also explains why changing behavior solely through logical argument is often ineffective. If the emotional body drives decisions, then addressing only the reasoning layer is like trying to steer a ship by adjusting the captain's hat without changing the rudder. True change requires engaging the emotional body, acknowledging fears, desires, and past wounds that fuel impulses. In relationships, this dynamic manifests when people argue about choices that feel irrational. One partner may offer logical reasons, while the other acts on emotions not fully expressed. Recognizing the emotional override helps cultivate empathy, understanding that beneath surface disagreements lie emotional currents shaping decisions. Mindfulness and emotional awareness practices offer paths to bridge this gap. By tuning into emotional signals before they override, you gain a chance to notice impulses consciously. You can then engage reason more authentically, rather than retrofitting justifications. This doesn't mean emotions lose their power. It means you develop a dialogue between feeling and thought. Philosophically, the emotional override problem challenges classic models of free will based on rational deliberation. It suggests that autonomy is more nuanced, a dance between unconscious emotion and conscious thought. You are not a detached thinker, but an embodied being whose feelings color every choice. Importantly, this problem is not a flaw, but a feature of human nature. Emotions evolved as rapid evaluators for survival, enabling swift decisions in complex environments. Reason evolved later to refine and contextualize those decisions. The tension between emotion and reason is the engine of human complexity. The key is balance and integration. When emotion and reason collaborate, decisions become both authentic and thoughtful, When disconnected, the emotional override problem leads to fragmentation and internal conflict. So, next time you justify a choice with logic, pause to ask, what did my emotional body decide first? What feelings preceded the story I tell myself? In that inquiry lies the potential to uncover deeper truths about your motivations and to align your decisions more fully with your whole self. The emotional override problem invites you to embrace the richness of your inner life, acknowledging that reason is a brilliant storyteller, but the emotional body is often the true author. Together, they script the unfolding drama of your choices. The identity is input error. You think your self chooses, but your self is just an output of inputs. The chooser is chosen. This statement cracks open a profound paradox about identity, free will, and consciousness. We experience ourselves as decision makers, autonomous beings who act from a core self, the I behind every choice, desire, and thought. But what if that I is not the originator, but rather the product? What if the self that seems to command is itself commanded by countless unseen forces, shaping it before it ever acts? Every moment, your brain receives an immense influx of inputs: sensory data, memories, emotions, chemical signals, social cues, and subconscious patterns. These inputs flow into neural networks, where they interact and combine in complex ways, giving rise to the emergent phenomenon you call your selfhood. Your identity, preferences, beliefs, and even intentions are not static, unchanging cores, but dynamic constructions, continually updated by the ongoing stream of influences. To say the chooser is chosen is to flip the common narrative. Rather than an agent behind decisions, you are the endpoint of processes shaped by genetics, environment, culture, and history. Your brain integrates stimuli, external events, internal drives, past experiences, and from this confluence emerges what feels like a coherent self capable of choice. But the process runs beneath conscious awareness. The I you identify with is often a story your mind tells itself to make sense of complex internal activity. Consider the analogy of a computer program. The software's output depends entirely on its input data and coding. The user who sees the screen believes in the interface as the source of control, but the interface merely displays the outcome of underlying code reacting to inputs. Similarly, your self is the interface, rich, vivid, seemingly independent, but the real choosing happens in layers beneath, influenced by factors you do not command. Neuroscience offers compelling evidence. Studies reveal that neural activity predicting decisions occurs before conscious awareness. This means that your brain begins preparing a choice before you feel you have decided. The conscious self watches the process unfold, then claims responsibility, constructing a narrative of free will after the fact. This perspective challenges traditional notions of moral responsibility, identity, and autonomy. If the self is an output, chosen by prior causes, how do we account for accountability? How do we reconcile the experience of freedom with the mechanistic underpinnings of choice? Philosophers have long debated this. Compatibilism argues that free will can coexist with determinism if freedom is understood as acting in accordance with one's desires and reasons, even if those desires themselves are caused. But the identity as input error probes deeper. It suggests that even the desires and reasons are not independent origins, but products of prior influences. Examples abound in everyday life. Your tastes in music, your political views, your fears and ambitions are shaped by upbringing, culture, and neural plasticity. When you think you freely chose your beliefs, you are often unaware of the layered inputs, conversations, media, family narratives that shaped those choices long before you consciously endorsed them. The implications extend to self-understanding and mental health. Recognizing that the self is constructed from inputs can reduce harsh self-judgment and open avenues for growth. If your identity is malleable, influenced by environment and cognition, then change is possible through altering inputs, new experiences, therapy, education, mindfulness. You are not a fixed agent, but a fluid process. Yet this fluidity can also be disorienting. If the chooser is chosen, then who are you? The answer may be that you are the emergent process itself, a dynamic system of inputs, integration, and narrative. This challenges the ego's desire for a stable, sovereign self, but offers a richer, more interconnected vision of consciousness. In the context of choice, this means that decisions arise not from a singular I, but from the interaction of countless inputs forming the identity at that moment. Your self is both the stage and the actor, constantly rewritten by what it encounters. Choice becomes a dance between input and output, cause and effect, with no fixed origin point. Understanding the identity as input error invites humility and curiosity. It urges us to question the solidity of our self-concepts and the origins of our decisions. It encourages exploration of how inputs, what we expose ourselves to, the habits we cultivate, the stories we internalize, shape the self that believes it chooses. In a world saturated with information, influence, and complexity, this insight is crucial. It reminds us that freedom is not the isolated power of a static self, but the emergent property of how inputs combine and resonate within us. The compression paradox. Imagine standing before a vast, complex landscape filled with endless possibilities. Countless variables, nuances, and shades of meaning stretching beyond comprehension. Yet, when it comes time to act, you're handed only two stark choices, boiled down to a simple binary: yes or no, left or right, this or that. This is the heart of the compression paradox, the process of reducing infinite complexity into limited options and mistaking that reduction for freedom. But collapsing complexity is not choice, it is compression. Life, reality, and human experience teem with complexity. Every situation involves myriad factors, emotions, contexts, histories, potentials that resist neat categorization. However, our minds, constrained by cognitive limits and the need for efficient decision-making, compress this complexity into manageable chunks. This mental compression is a survival tool, helping us act without drowning in endless variables. But here lies the paradox. When infinite nuance is compressed into binary choices, the richness of possibility vanishes. What feels like freedom, the ability to choose, is actually a narrowing, a forced simplification. You do not select among all potential realities, but between two sharply defined abstractions. The spectrum of nuance collapses into yes, no, black, white, on, off. The world's infinite variables shrink into a compressed code. This paradox surfaces in many realms. Consider digital technology, where all data reduces to bits, zeros, and ones. While this binary system powers computation, it is a compressed representation of a far more complex reality. Similarly, in decision-making, framing a problem as a binary choice glosses over subtleties, masking compression as freedom. Politically, citizens often face two-party systems, starkly polarized debates, and simplified narratives. Voters believe they exercise freedom by choosing a side, but the rich diversity of political thought and social nuance is compressed into opposing poles. This compression restricts genuine choice and fuels division. In psychology, humans tend to categorize experiences into binaries, good or bad, success or failure, to reduce cognitive load. Yet this distorts reality and limits understanding. The compression paradox reveals that our mental shortcuts, while necessary, shrink the field of genuine freedom. Philosophically, freedom implies the capacity to navigate a broad space of options. Compression restricts this space, turning freedom into the illusion of choice between predetermined binaries. True freedom would embrace complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity rather than collapse them. Even in language, complex emotions and ideas get compressed into simple words, losing subtlety. When you decide based on compressed language and concepts, your choice is mediated by the limits of that compression. Recognizing the compression paradox challenges us to question the nature of choice and freedom. Are we choosing freely, or are we navigating compressed representations of reality designed to simplify and control? The paradox invites expanding awareness beyond binaries, seeking richer frameworks that honor complexity. Breaking free requires cultivating tolerance for ambiguity, resisting the urge to reduce nuance prematurely, and embracing multidimensional perspectives. It calls for designing systems, social, political, personal, that reflect complexity rather than compress it. In practice, this might mean refusing false binaries, exploring middle grounds, and creating space for diverse options. It means seeing freedom not as a yes-no toggle, but as a fluid spectrum where genuine choice unfolds. The compression paradox is a mirror held up to our decision-making. It shows how simplification, while useful, can masquerade as liberation, concealing the loss of possibility behind the ease of binary selection. So, next time you face a choice framed in black and white, remember, what seems like freedom may be compression. True freedom lives in the complexity you resist compressing, the infinite variables that defy simple answers and invite authentic creation. Understanding this paradox transforms choice from a compressed yes or no into an expansive journey through the rich, uncollapsed terrain of life. The recursive ownership fallacy. You believe you own your choices, that the you who decides, who claims responsibility, who feels real, is the true author of your actions. But what if this sense of ownership is itself a carefully constructed illusion? What if the you who claims ownership is already shaped, molded, conditioned, and constrained by forces beyond your control? This is the heart of the recursive ownership fallacy, the loop where the self that owns choices is formed by unchosen influences, so the act of ownership closes before it ever truly begins. Consider the moment you make a decision. You feel that deep conviction, that intimate connection with the choice, as if it springs purely from your authentic self. Ownership feels like proof of reality, a tether to existence. But beneath this feeling lies a hidden cycle. The you who feels real is not a timeless essence, but a construct shaped by upbringing, culture, biology, and countless unseen factors. Your sense of agency is built on a foundation of influences you never chose. This creates a paradoxical loop. The self who claims "I choose" is already a product of forces outside conscious control. Yet, it takes this constructed self as the ultimate authority. Ownership becomes recursive. You own your choice because the self owning it was itself owned and shaped. The loop is closed before it starts, folding back into itself like an Ouroboros consuming its own tail. This fallacy unsettles our deepest convictions about free will and personal responsibility. It forces us to ask, if the you who owns is conditioned, where does genuine authorship reside? Are choices ever truly free, or are they expressions of inherited programming masquerading as autonomy? Neuroscience offers insight here. The brain constantly integrates sensory input, memories, and subconscious patterns to generate what feels like conscious choice. The I that experiences decision is a post hoc narrative, a storyteller weaving coherence from fragmented processes. Ownership is a story told by a self already shaped by history and biology, not a witness outside influence. Psychologically, this fallacy explains why people struggle with internal conflict. The self that judges choices often feels alienated from the parts of itself that act. Ownership feels fragmented because the you claiming it is fragmented. The recursive loop traps identity within a hall of mirrors where cause and effect blur. Socially, this fallacy challenges concepts of blame and credit. If ownership is recursive, how do we hold individuals accountable without recognizing the shaping forces they cannot escape? It calls for compassion and a nuanced understanding of agency, one that honors both influence and choice. Yet, the recursive ownership fallacy is not a nihilistic dead end. Instead, it invites radical humility and curiosity. Recognizing the loop frees you from the illusion of a fixed, autonomous self and opens the possibility of conscious participation in shaping your own becoming. Awareness dissolves the closed loop. When you see that ownership is constructed, you can begin to loosen its automatic grip. You can question inherited narratives, explore unconscious patterns, and gradually reauthor the story of self with greater freedom. This process is neither quick nor easy. It requires patience and courage to face the shadows of conditioning without falling into despair. But it is also profoundly empowering because it reveals that the self is not a static given, but a dynamic process you can influence. Philosophers from existentialism to modern psychology have grappled with this paradox. The self is simultaneously owned and owning, shaped and shaping, prisoner and liberator. The recursive ownership fallacy highlights the tension and invites ongoing exploration. In practice, cultivating mindfulness and reflective inquiry helps disentangle the loop. By observing thoughts, feelings, and impulses with openness, you create space between influence and response. This space is the birthplace of true agency. Therapeutic approaches that integrate body awareness, narrative work, and cognitive flexibility can support this unraveling. They empower you to witness the recursive loop without becoming trapped in it. Ultimately, the recursive ownership fallacy teaches that ownership is a fluid, emergent property rather than an absolute state. The self that owns is both the product of countless influences and the artist of new possibilities. So, when you next claim ownership of a choice, remember the loop behind it. The you claiming ownership is itself a creation, both inherited and invented. To live authentically is to dance with this paradox, embracing the mystery of becoming rather than the illusion of having arrived. This awareness does not diminish responsibility, it deepens it. It invites you to own not only your choices, but the conditions that shaped those choices, and to engage in a lifelong practice of conscious recreation. The loop closes before it begins, but through awareness, you can open it again. You become both the closing and the opening, the fallacy and its transcendence. And in that space lies the profound freedom of selfhood. The authorless script illusion. Your life feels like a story unfolding, a movie playing scene by scene with you as the main character. You remember the past acts, anticipate the next scenes, and believe you are the author, writing your own script as you go. But what if there is no author at all? What if the script you live by was never written by you, but by forces far beyond conscious control? Momentum, memory, and cause? This is the essence of the authorless script illusion. From the first breath, your life is shaped by momentum, the relentless force of past actions pushing forward, setting the stage for what comes next. Every choice you think you make is influenced by what came before, a cascade of causes and effects chaining endlessly. This momentum creates the script that seems uniquely yours, but is really a continuation of an unbroken flow. Memory is another invisible author. Your mind collects fragments of past experiences, beliefs, traumas, and triumphs. It edits and rewrites these memories constantly, forming the story you tell yourself about who you are. Yet these memories are not static truths. They are reconstructed narratives, shaped by emotion, bias, and necessity. The story you live is a memory-based script rewritten every moment, but not authored freshly by you. Cause, the third author, governs the logical chain of events. Every action triggers consequences, each effect becoming the cause of another. Your life is a domino sequence where every scene depends on the last, guided by laws of nature, society, and psychology. This causal web writes your story's structure without conscious intent or design. Taken together, momentum, memory, and cause compose a script authored not by a conscious self, but by systemic forces. The idea that you are writing your own life becomes an illusion, a comforting fiction to navigate existence. But the truth is, your life's narrative is authored by the accumulation of prior events, edited by subjective memory, and constrained by causality. This raises the haunting question. If there is no author, who is reading this script now? Who experiences this story moment by moment? The I that believes it is, the author may itself be a character in the script, an emergent observer constructed by the flow of momentum, memory, and cause. Philosophers call this the no-self or emptiness insight, that the stable, autonomous self is a mirage created by the mind's narrative activity. The reader you feel yourself to be is just another node in the story, caught in the illusion of authorship. This illusion is powerful because it gives us a sense of agency and meaning. Believing we author our story provides comfort, responsibility, and identity. Yet it can also trap us in repetition, bound by scripts written long before conscious choice. Understanding the authorless script illusion invites profound humility. It urges us to see life not as a scripted drama authored by an individual ego, but as a flowing river of cause, memory, and momentum with no fixed source. Yet, within this realization lies freedom. If the script is not authored by a fixed self, then the reader can become aware of the script's patterns. Awareness can loosen the grip of predetermined scenes, allowing space for improvisation amid the script's flow. This awareness does not grant absolute control, but opens a new relationship to life, a dance with the unfolding story rather than rigid authorship. The reader can notice the script's lines, recognize recurring themes, and choose when to resist or flow with the narrative currents. The authorless script. Illusion challenges everything we believe about identity and agency. It asks us to reconsider who we are in the movie of life. Are we the author, the actor, or the audience. Perhaps we are all three, or none. Perhaps the true self is the awareness that witnesses the story without clinging to authorship. In embracing this, we find a paradoxical freedom to live fully within the script, while knowing it has no fixed author, to act meaningfully, even when the story feels written by forces beyond us. And in that paradox lies the mystery and beauty of being, an authorless script read by a silent witness, unfolding endlessly in the theater of now.